Good evening, and welcome to Tea Time with me, Caetsu Chaiji, but you can just call me Kai. As usual, these streams are basically an opportunity to just talk about anything, everything Final Fantasy XIV. If you have a question about something in the game you don't understand, something you're curious about, something you'd like my opinion on, whatever it is, this is a great time to ask that on account of me basically just sitting here ready to talk. Yeah, and throughout this stream, we will be going through some clips that the community posted, the community, if you will. And if you are interested in posting your own clips to the clip review, there is a room for that on the community Discord server, which you can find there. Yeah, I'm guessing people are still getting their tea. And I realized that I forgot something in the kitchen, so I will be right back really quickly. Really quickly. However, watch us here. Manatee all the four. Right, yeah, I forgot something. Right, I'm back. And now I'm ready. Hey Aridel, hey Coco, hey Amokius, hey Jade, and hey Goddammit, I hope you're all doing very well. And hey Makoto, I hope you're doing well. And Mastermind. And yeah, if you want to hang out in-game, remember that I am on EU Chaos Louisoire, Ward 29, Plot 36. And if you can't remember that, I am almost certain people are very willing to remind you if you ask in the chat. Hey Skip, hey Goslin, hey Warfare, hope you're doing well. Yeah. So in regards to the clips that we have, let me find my notes. We have a clip from Bondi of some top gameplay. I'm not sure how much of it they wanted us to see, so I'll need Bondi to know. Jet posted a clip that is supposed to be kind of interesting, but I don't know if Jet is here. Amokius is here, and they posted a funny clip from P12. I think P12 normal, but yeah. And then Sergeant Blaine posted a impressive, I think it's a four-man nail bandanas clip. And then Gazel posted a Smail Darkhold clip. And Ymir posted a Expert Roulette clip of Dark Knight. And I will, as I say in the pinned comment, I will prioritize the clips of people who are in the chat, because they will probably get more value out of it, seeing it live and being able to, respond to it live. Mastermind asks, is data center travel between NA and EU servers even possible? It has not been enabled, but we know that they have the technology. They have basically somewhere in the Squeenix building, they have a switch, hypothetical switch, where they can just turn it on. They just haven't because of concerns of this and that. We've talked about this before. I can get back to that in a moment. But yeah, the short answer is no, we can't data center travel between regions yet. That is an interesting option, Gogo. It's your body. And hey Bob, hope you're doing well. But yeah, basically what we've been told about the data center, the worldwide data center travel, is they have made it. It should be ready. It should be functional. However, and this is something that you might recognize. For example, if you watch some of my videos that sometimes can get into more social stuff, like mentor stuff, where you'll notice that depending on what world, what data center players are from, their experience with mentors can vary massively, like insanely so. Because the region is different, and that's not just a mentor thing, it's like a player-based thing. Each player, like the player base in each region is different, which means that the kind of people you meet on the NA data centers will like act differently socially compared to the EU players or the JP players or the OC players. And there's also just a lot of like community stuff in each region that might be crushed by suddenly, you know, opening the floodgates, as you will. And the biggest problem, I think, the biggest concern potentially, which might relate to the cloud data center test that we had just recently, is that if they were to open worldwide travel, hypothetically. Oh, I sold some chocolate. If they were to open worldwide data center travel, then if you're an EU data center player and you're a Savage Raider, maybe even an Ultimate Raider, you might recognize the problem if you're not in a static that you probably have to visit Light to get a group for stuff. Don't know how many in the chat will say that sounds familiar, but if you are in like the subsection that is Savage Raider or Ultimate Raider who relies on Party Finder, it probably sounds familiar. If there was worldwide data center travel, you would have the same problem. It's just that whichever was the biggest data center in the first place, which might be one of the NA ones, is where people congregate to make their groups. And that will probably not be super fun, like in relation to connection. It would mega suck as an EU player that you have to deal with connecting to NA whenever you want to Savage Raid, and all other content you play in a week, you have a good connection. Like, that's a bad idea. And it would happen. It's basically guaranteed that it would happen. See, Jade says it's probably mostly a West and Japan difference. It might be mainly that, but I do happen to know that like simpler things are different between EU and NA. Like, I can just like it happens to be one that I know that I have in my hat, but I can just pull like a rabbit out of a hat and go, NA and EU does not agree on how you explain tactics in a raid team. That's one thing, and it's a pretty big thing. So, like, that's not super a social thing, but it's just one example of how EU and NA are massively different. Is that even something as simple as how you go about deciding how you explain boss mechanics and strategies isn't, like, the same depending on region. It's pretty wild. And if you go a step further, I could imagine that the entire JP region will have their minds blown if, like, a West region team comes over and does Alliance Roulette and gets Labyrinth of the Ancients and they pull the dragon away. Meanwhile, like, it's the exact opposite when you have a Japanese person or someone who's used to the JP data center coming to the West. Isn't that right, Gassel? So it's very complicated. I'm not saying that should dictate whether we can have worldwide data center travel, but these are the kinds of concerns for why the developers can say, oh yeah, we have it. It's basically finished. It's ready to ship. And we then go, so why haven't you? And they go, oh, well, you see, because it is like social community things. Opening the floodgates, they don't close again. And you can't, like, the thing is, what is likely to happen, because this happened when data center travel was enabled in the first place, is that everyone suddenly, you know, the data center travel system was completely overwhelmed with the amount of people using it in all regions, except the oceanic region on account of not having multiple data centers, but you get what I mean. And then after like 1 or 2 weeks, it kind of died down. The thing you'll notice is that many players just stay on the, like, either they stay on their own data center or they visit a different data center for specific reasons. For example, Amokius here is visiting Chaos to visit me specifically, and might very well go home afterwards. And similarly, people go to Light to do their Savage raiding and stuff like that. So, like, once the initial, like, explosion of interest has died down, it just becomes, like, normal. And what will that normal be? Right? Like, right now, we have the Japanese data centers have a problem where, because a significant portion of the player base understandably does not speak English, but a significant portion, especially people that like live closer to Japan than Europe, ended up like finding a Japanese data center to like flock to and speak English. Now that those doors are open, certain players on the Japanese data centers will have to like say no one from there, or they feel like they have to, because people will blindly join a group that is all Japanese and then be like, why does no one understand me? I'm speaking English, right? And this could become worse if we had worldwide data center travel, even though, on the other hand, the Western player base has no reason to like go to the Japanese data centers and then queue for stuff, right? It would be weird. Also, hello Hayapin, hello Soul Silver, and hello Merfolk. I hope you're all doing very well. Let me just catch up. I went a little bit of a ramble there. Exactly, it's culture conflict. And yeah, Gazel, the suggestion perhaps they should only that the people who know Japanese travel to the Japanese region. How would they police that? Soul Silver says NA hates being told they are B dumb, even though they are. I'm guessing the B is a typo. And Makoto says, so true, said the NA player. I can't speak on that, but something that I can say for certain is that, just as an example, when I do like, for example, roulettes and run into people that I give advice, people typically don't get, like, there's the occasional person who gets really that gets mad about it, but they're so rare that I basically don't count it. Most people are friendly and accepting of advice as long as it's given in a friendly manner. Meanwhile, if I read my comment section and take it at face value, then like 80% of the player base will not take advice without exploding in a fit of rage at you. Right? But that's of course because that's the vocal minority, we've talked about this before, who talks about it, who has had to deal with it. And the question is, where are they from? I don't know where they're from, but I can say that the majority of my viewers are from America, so there's a reasonable chance there's an overlap here. I don't know if that's the overlap. But like, that's an example of how communication can be problematic. Hey Bondi, hope you're doing well. I feel like it's been a while. Or maybe not. Wouldn't an auto-translation be the solution? Oh boy, do I have a tip for you. Did you know that if you write something in the chat, you can, by pressing tab, you can use auto-translate and it will show up translated to whatever the person's client is. It's very limited what you can say, but it does translate to something meaningful in every language that is available. The problem is that to explain something like a boss mechanic or a tactic, you kind of need to go deeper than that. That's also why like serviceable levels of Google Translate probably won't get the point across, and it will also severely reduce the speed of communication. And they people only have so much time, right? So it's simply they do that to avoid this communication problem. And Jace, you're right. You keep saying we in the West do not have a reason to go to the Japanese and queue for things, but what reason do they have to come here? Just playing a bit of devil's advocate. You're correct. So let's build on that. So what reason do we have for worldwide data center travel at the end of the day? The Japanese people have no reason to visit the rest of the world, and the rest of the world have no reason to visit the Japanese, and ultimately we chose to be, I chose to be on EU, right? And the NA players chose to be on the NA servers. So we have no reason to visit each other. There's no opportunity ever or reason ever for someone who isn't on the same data center to want to visit someone. There's zero Japanese people in the universe who wants to visit EU or NA or OC. And also there are absolutely, and let me build on that further. There are zero Americans or Europeans in the world that would like to visit the Japanese data centers. At all. No, there are no weeps. They don't exist. They don't exist. I'm just messing with you, Chase. I'm not targeting you. I'm just trying to build on the point you're making. That we don't have a reason to visit each other ultimately. We don't really do. Not really. But it would be nice. We all know EU is the only set of servers with diversity. I don't know about that, but it's possible. I don't know. Bondi says I became an expert at auto-translate the tier played on JP. I could imagine that. Folks, I just imagined a party where each other speaks a different language. One is Spanish, one is English, one is Japanese, one is French. Now that would be chaos. Now, imagine if they understood each other. Wouldn't that be incredible? What a world. Mastermind says, imagine the world's disgust when they discover Balmung, Lemsa, and Uldar. See, the interesting thing is, according to what I've heard, the majority of the people making Balmung like that are people that have either the Wanderer or the Traveler tag on them, because they're coming to Balmung to be weird, because they've heard that's where you're weird. And hey, Sergeant Blaine, hope you're doing well. And hey, Tristan, I hope you're doing well. Mastermind says, meanwhile, there's a giant fight over someone being told to use their tank AoEs to hold aggro. Is that the drama that I've been seeing a little bit about? What? What's the context on that? I generally try to avoid the drama. What's that? What even is that? What's the story there? Let's see, Soul Silver says, usually those that don't take advice are WoW refugees, is what my experience is. You know, I don't think I count as a WoW refugee, given how early, how much of an early adopter I was to Final Fantasy XIV, Stormblood. But technically, I came from WoW and I'm open to criticism, but I get your point. It makes sense. People are very defensive when they come from WoW, for a good reason, because usually advice isn't as well-meaning. in World of Warcraft, to my knowledge. Yeah, because says people can't understand mechanics that are explained in their language. You think using auto translate would be better? Also, hey Tentacles, hope you're doing well. And hey Cat, hope you're doing very well. See, Mastermind said someone was single target attacking mobs as a level 90 tank. Started pulling the "you don't pay my sub" line, blah blah blah. Oh yeah, right, Kitsuneko, it is time. It is time, everybody, to remind Kitsuneko to not be late for their respawning mine ore situation. That level 90 tank single targeting and then getting mad when told to AoE, you know, I don't know if I've met that player, but I've met a player like that a while ago. I think I've told this story before. So the story is, Cat says, actually the tank didn't get mad, their friend did. This story is getting weirder by the minute. But you know, that actually makes really good sense. That actually makes really, really good sense. Because the thing is, when you're defending yourself, you have like a degree of like investment in the situation, right? Like, you know how much you care about it. This tank clearly cared so little that they didn't even respond. But their friend, who doesn't know how hurt their tank friend is from the news, will simply defend their friend as aggressively as possible. I think we talked about this in relation to I'll try to be vague because I know there are some people that haven't finished the MSQ, in relation to things happening in the post game of Endwalker. If you're trying to live out someone else's dream, you might go a little bit further than they were ultimately willing to do it, right? It's kind of relatable. But that is really silly. My story, however, was me doing Bottom's Metal back in Shadowbringers as healer. The tank didn't really use defensive cooldowns, and I did ask them maybe use some defensive cooldowns. They kinda didn't react. The more problematic part was that they were exclusively using 1-2-3 combos. They were alternating targets so that they would barely keep aggro on everything. Like, they just hit everything once and then focused on one target and single targeted down with 1-2-3 combos. Not a good start. And when I finally, like, I kind of brought it up once or twice, and then, like, during the final boss in Bottom's Metal, I brought it up again, like, or rather, the conversation came to a head because the person argued that I had no say in whether they were good or bad. They knew exactly how to play tank on account of having 3 out of the 4 tanks at max level, and the only one they were missing was the one they were playing at that very moment. And the only thing I could say to that was, well, you're not a very good tank. And both of the DPS then, who had been quiet the entire dungeon, went, yeah, you're not a good tank though. Like, the argument of I leveled a lot of jobs doesn't mean you're good at it. I'm just saying, there are ways to level a job without ever playing it in Final Fantasy XIV. You can level a combat job without playing it. So having a level, yeah, frontline, well, you need to get to level 30 first. I mean, you can, like, do stuff like hand in Wondrous Tales enough times to reach level 30, and then you just have to get the job crystal, and then you can do frontline. Like, you can level a job without playing it. You could also just buy a boost, as Egg Roller says. You could just buy a boost. And then you can just, you know, Wondrous Tales and frontline to level 90. Like, having a level 90 says nothing. Mokia says, excuse me, Mr. Streamer, single target has more upfront potency, so it's clearly superior. Doesn't matter in what situation. Also, hey HK, and hey Dretharian. And also, hey, Egg Roller. That name sounds familiar. Very familiar. Is it a coincidence, or is it the Egg Roller? The one that makes the funny memes and the comics? I'm pretty sure that's the Egg Roller, right? You don't make the comics. Fair enough. Still appreciate you, nonetheless. You had the name first. The OG Egg Roller. Yeah, I'm just asking. And you can have the eggiest of Egg Rollers indeed. See, Skip says, I fed all my extra MSQ XP to Reaper and got it to 90 that way. Have yet to ever play it. But it's funny. The general conclusion there is, like, don't get mad when people are like, if people are giving you advice in a friendly tone, in a friendly manner, then don't get so mad about it, right? I'm sure most of you in the chat don't get mad about it in those situations, but just think about it. The person is probably giving you advice because they want to help you, not because they want to ruin your day. This was also something that I talked about yesterday on the Discord server, that you can give advice to people. It's about how you say it in most cases, in my experience. But there's also a matter of how much you say. Like, if you pop into, like, I don't know, Brayflux Longstop, and the tank has forgotten to put on their tank stance, you mention it, they put on the tank stance, they're single targeting, so you tell them maybe you should AoE a bit, they do that, and then you see they don't use any defensive cooldowns, so you mention that, and then they just, you know, face plant on every single defensive cooldown they have, and you're like, no, not like that. Then it starts becoming really, really detailed, right? You're starting to ask quite a lot of them, it feels like. And eventually they'll just be like, this is very overwhelming. Wasn't it good enough that I was just tanking? Like, I'm not even wall-to-wall pulling. I'm just pulling one pack at a time. I'm just trying to figure out all this stuff you're telling me. So, like, maybe baby steps, right? Like, if you get a tank in Brayflux Longstop that doesn't understand the tank stance and doesn't understand AoE, yeah, maybe they should have learned that by Zastasha, but they haven't. So as long as they're not dying, as long as they're not wiping, you know, just give them enough information. Like, give them a little nugget of information, just a little bit, so that they get a little better. Just a little bit. If you give too much, it'll be overwhelming, and then they'll either none of it will stick, or they'll just get mad at you. Let me see. Soul Silver says, I'd rather tanks not do wall-to-wall than not at all and don't use ramparts. I'm a little confused. Did you add a not somewhere? Murfolk says, I do believe you've touched this issue maybe yesterday or on Tuesday while talking about how long does it take to stop being a new player. In the words of one of our greatest memes, why you have to be mad? It's just a game. Indeed, when are you no longer a new player? On the contrary, when do you stop being a bad player? Because depending on how much energy you invest in learning, you can be a very new player, but a very good player. Similarly, you can not try very hard and be a very old player, but terrible at the game. So it might be the problem that we're for some reason like correlating being new with being bad, right? You never stop being a bad player. I mean, I go into a dungeon on stream that I'm supposed to be good at. And then I just die because I'm too busy not looking at the screen, right? Cat says, yesterday I learned Praetorium is much more fun as machinist if tank doesn't have stance on. That's an interesting one. Personally, like, the thing is, in regards to what Soulsilver is saying, I'd rather tanks do wall-to-wall than not at all and don't use Rampart. I'm still a little confused at what you were trying to say, but I'm guessing what you meant is I would rather people do wall-to-wall pulls than them not doing wall-to-wall pulls and also not using Rampart. I see what you mean, like, you would rather they significantly overpull compared to their actual skill level as a tank, because you can compensate for that, especially if you're a healer, rather than having them pull to their skill level and you sit there sleeping. Right? Like, I get that. The reason why I don't mind is because if the tank is overpulling and I have to compensate by, like, being mega sweaty tryhard healer mode, like going full blast, that works this time. Then the tank goes into a new dungeon and does it again, but that healer isn't ready for it or isn't skilled enough to deal with that, so they wipe. As far as the tank is concerned, who might be a new player and not realize that they got carried by the healer in the last round, are sitting there like, this worked last time. Why isn't it working now? I was here last time. There's a new healer. Maybe the healer's bad. So, by the tank playing to their skill level, it means, of course, that I'm sitting here like, just like really slacking it. Because I don't need to work hard. But it does mean that all I have, like, that instead of me basically grabbing them by the collar and dragging them over the finish line, I'm just holding their hand, right? So when the potentially worse healer comes up in the next dungeon, that healer will be able to deal well enough that they might be able to, like, be the healer that says, tank, why are you not using defensive cooldowns? You're pulling a bit much, or whatever. But by simply making sure, like, by having the tank pull to their skill level, then it means that you don't have to, like, excessively cover for their skill, like, for their lack of skill. It is complicated because, on the other hand, as BMO says, sometimes you gotta experience some failures to learn, and that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And that is, of course, like, if I had... See, that's the thing. That's exactly the thing. If I had landed in Greyflux Longstop, and the tank just went, you know, sicko mode and pulled everything, but didn't use any defensive cooldowns, and they somehow died, because they didn't, even though I was healing as much as I could, then I could be like, well, you weren't using any defensive cooldowns. Like, that's the thing. If I get a tank who's clearly having a hard time, they might be a Dark Knight getting their first dungeon ever. They are doing Braveflux Longstop. And they need advice on how to AoE. If they're not, like, wall-to-wall pulling, then I'm like, okay, fine, you know you're not great. Like, you realize that you should play carefully because you're not confident. Oh, you were agreeing with me, Soul Silver. Fair enough. still, hopefully an excellent point is being made here from that. But yeah, if your tank is pulling like a sprout, then you teach them like a sprout. If they're pulling like a veteran player, then you teach them like they should be a veteran player, right? If they're pulling as if they know what they're doing, but they don't, then you either need to tell them to stop doing that, or, you know, give them a crash course in what they don't know. Or, if you can't be bothered, you'll just have to work extra hard if you're the healer. Also, hey Designs and Riga and Bimo, because there's an interesting fix to this issue would be to provide some feedback at the end of the dungeons. For example, give tanks how much damage they mitigated and a score based on that. Give DPS a damage score, etc. And if people are worried about toxicity, just make it personal and don't show it to others. And interesting. Also, hey Bazrock. I'll answer you in just a moment, Bazrock. An interesting thing with that is that they could do that for like casual content, like give you a score after casual content. The reason why it might be problematic to give such a score after a like savage encounter or something is because if the game gives any officially sanctioned, because the game said it, DPS meter basically, then people will use it in a toxic way. The thing is, people are already using the tools that we don't have, wink, outside of the game in a toxic way. So by keeping that out of the game and saying it's not allowed, they are they're removing that problem, at least in part. It's a problem because it would be helpful, Rega. It would be helpful. Absolutely. But there's also one more thing to consider. I wonder if a score of how much damage you mitigated would actually be a helpful score. It would be helpful for like basic information. It would be better than nothing, right? See, Bazrock says, I've been super curious ever since the first time I watched one of your guides. If it's okay to ask, are you Scandinavian by any chance? I am myself, and your accent made me curious. I'm Danish. Yeah, I know, and I understand. I also understand what you're saying, Bondi, that the benefits of having an integrated DPS meter would be incredibly good for those that need it or want it. The reason why I'm like way in the back here about official DPS meters is because I know. I have seen what happens when a game basically officially allows DPS meters. All you have to do is welcome to Caetsu Chaiji channel, where a stream cannot happen without World of Warcraft being mentioned. Did you know Season of Discovery started today? Oh boy, I wonder who's playing it. I'm not, at least. Not yet, at least. You just have to turn your gaze to World of Warcraft, where DPS meters are used as reason to kick someone from a leveling dungeon. In World of Warcraft, well, if this was World of Warcraft, that tank... that hypothetical tank that I said that didn't know how to use their tank stance and didn't know how to AoE, it wouldn't be a problem at all. You just kick them. They're not tanking good, so you kick them. Just there's the door. Just invite a new tank. Damage dealer not doing well. Oh, invite a new DPS. Healer not attacking. There's the door. And part of this originates from the DPS meter. And yeah, Bondi, Season of Discovery started today. Or it should start today. I don't know if it's started yet, but it should start today. Yet sometimes people use a DPS meter to gauge who deserves loot and who don't. This can also happen in Final Fantasy XIV. This is why I said these toxic things are already happening outside of the game. Like, if there's something that isn't allowed to be discussed in Final Fantasy XIV, let me see if I can find one. That's a surprisingly few amounts of party finder groups, or maybe not. I don't know. You know that something you know with a decent probability that something fishy might be going on if the comment on the party finder group refers to a Discord invite link. That means they don't want to talk with you in-game. Potentially. Not necessarily, but potentially it means that it's because they don't want to talk with you in-game. And why would that be? Maybe because it's not allowed to talk about these things in-game. Who knows? Cedar Siren says, in WoW, people would link DPS meters in basic looking for group raids. I forget the name of the mode, but it's a raid you can just queue for. Yeah, like looking for raid. You can also just join a random group, and it would still apply. But yeah, in looking for raid, they'll still do that. And you say, I'm not sure, I forgot the name of the mod. Let's see, SCADA, Recount. Oh, what's the one that I've been... Details? There's more. Like, in World of Warcraft, there's a whole suite of DPS meters. You choose your favorite one. Hey, Raka, hope you're doing well. Yeah, looking for raid is kind of similar to Alliance raid. Like, similar. The interesting thing with looking for raid is that, in my experience, it feels like the difficulty scale on that is completely whack. Like, either it's too hard or it's too easy. Like last time I played World of Warcraft retail back in BFA, I got the impression that looking for raids difficulty was designed under the assumption that at least a few experienced players with better gear would join to like lead the charge, because the fights weren't trivial. Compare that to Alliance raid, where at worst, you might wipe, but most of the mechanics are clear, and for the most part, you don't even need half the raid alive to do it. See, Matthew says, isn't looking for raid a case of the player base will get worse until the content is still hard? I suppose, in a way, yes. And yeah, Raka, it absolutely sucks to be kicked because a third-party app said you sucked. I mean, it also sucks to be told to get kicked because the actual game said you suck, right? And that's the thing. If you got like this, like basically receipt at the end of a dungeon saying you did bad damage, then, well, you get it at the end of the dungeon. But if they did it for any meaningful content where people would, you know, group together for it, then, like, it can be complicated to like, broach the subject of DPS because, you know, you can't talk about it in-game. As long as you keep it in-game, you know, above board, then it can be difficult for someone to actually approach you about it. But if the game itself says what your DPS was, then other people can go, hey yo, how much damage did you do? How much DPS did you do? And then you had the choice of saying the truth, lying, or refusing to share, and well, If you say the truth, your DPS might be bad and you might get kicked. If you lie, you might say something that is so outlandishly high that you'll get kicked. Or alternatively, the person asking you is using a DPS meter and are going, they know exactly how much DPS you're doing, so they know you're lying. They don't even need to check. Or didn't even need to ask. And if you refuse to answer, that's the same as acknowledging your DPS was bad. And the thing is, it's not like it's an easy solution, because the alternative in Party Finder, hypothetically, is if you, let's say you join a Savage Raid Party Finder group, and one of the DPS doesn't do enough damage, and you're wiping. You might acknowledge that you can't meet Enrage with this guy in the group. You can confront them about it, which means you know what their DPS is, which means you're using a DPS meter, probably. Or B, everyone but the bad player leaves the group and just reforms without them, so you didn't kick them for having bad DPS. I have seen this happen, by the way. Hey Zach, hope you're doing well. And hey Blue, hope you're doing well. See, Jade says, from my experience in the modern version of WoW, the damage meter is used mostly for getting information. It's complicated. If you're watching a coordinated group, like a raid team playing, then yeah, they will not need to worry about that. They just need to see what's happening, right? But if you, like, the problem with officially sanctioned DPS meters are not the coordinated groups. Just want to make that clear. The problem are not the coordinated groups, the teams that are already together. Those are not the problem. The problem is that the players that have no business worrying about the DPS meter causes the problem. Like, the people who are using the DPS meter as argument to kick someone in a leveling dungeon. Or the people who aren't seeing Enrage anyway, who are complaining that someone isn't doing enough damage. Those are the ones that make this a problem. The players that know how to use the tool right, the people that know how to read it right and understands that, well, if the group is taking a lot of damage and the healers have to spare more heals, or the red mage has to cast more raises, they're obviously going to do less damage and things like that. Those are not the problem. And that is also true to science. You could just come up with a different reason to kick someone. Let's see, Zach says, as a WoW guild and raid leader, my rule of thumb for DPS members: do what you can and just have fun. We don't need to become sweats or elites. Yeah, see, that works as long as you're playing at a difficulty of the game that matches with your skill level. That of course means whatever your skill level is, if everyone is good enough for that, then perfect. Right, perfect. Let's see, Mandalore says, is damage even a problem anywhere outside current Savages? I rate synced since July and I am yet to meet a DPS check. Well, it depends on your group. I would imagine, are you running it with a static, or are you doing it in Party Finder, Mandalore? I don't know if it's Mandalore or Mandalore. But yeah, exactly, Blue Marble. The story on that is that that's what DPS meters are sometimes used for in World of Warcraft. I'm not saying it happens in Final Fantasy XIV. Part of the problem, and part of the reason for that is that you can't just kick someone for being bad. You typically need more of a reason for that, otherwise you risk getting punished by a GM. I say risk because it's not guaranteed. Right, you raid with the Discord community. Yeah, so there's a good chance that you're playing with above average players. It's not guaranteed, but there's a good chance that you're getting a slice that is better, which is a good thing, right? That is ultimately a good thing. But yeah, if you're doing the content synced, that of course means if it's a challenge for you, that's perfect. I believe you will have to do a decent rotation. You don't have to be perfect, but so basically, if you've seen my guides, also let me just scroll up to something. I don't know if they're still here. Thank you, Basrock. I really appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. No worries that you say that you don't comment on videos. That's fine. I do appreciate the feedback. I do hope you continue to enjoy the guides. But what was I saying? As long as you're not seeing the DPS meters, that's fine. The DPS checks, that's fine. If you have watched my guides, you may see near the end of the videos for level 90, I generally show off a demonstration of a level 90 opener and rotation. And these openers and rotations tend to be maybe sometimes they are the equivalent of super sweaty try-hard opener and rotations. Sometimes. If they are really excessively complicated, I feel I usually try to say you can also just do this, or you don't have to worry about this if the entire rotation is excessively complicated. Try and explain it, what things matter, as opposed to what things don't matter as much. But all of those really, really sweaty opener rotations, you probably don't need that to meet an Enrage timer. You probably don't need that. That's mainly for parsers, right? However, if you are having trouble with a DPS check, then it is that would be a thing to inspect. Could you do more damage? Could you do more damage? If you are having trouble with a specific mechanic near the end of the fight, if you did more damage in the earlier parts of the fight, maybe you wouldn't have to see the mechanic. Maybe you can just remove the mechanic altogether. Maybe you can finish the fight in the middle of the mechanic before your group wipes. So basically, the part of the reason why people get so caught up on DPS meters and doing maximum damage and being really, really overkill tryhards at times is because I made a video about that somewhat recently, about the damage dealing bottleneck. The easiest way to optimize the skill level of your group is to assume everyone's an idiot except yourself, and if that's true, the best, most effective way to protect your idiot raid from dying is by the boss being dead first. The best way to minimize the damage everyone else takes in your raid is by killing the boss as quickly as possible. You think tenacity is a bad stat? Imagine if it reduced the damage everyone else takes. That might actually make it better. It's of course hyperbole in that regard, but the point is that part of the motivation for maximizing damage is that the easiest way to optimize your group is to remove the boss, because you can't trust anyone else. Not anyone else in your group to know what they're doing. Not necessarily. You can only, at the end of the day, you can only be sure you know what you know, and they know what they know. That is, of course, an extremely hostile way to view raiding, and I don't really subscribe to that notion, but it is one of the best arguments for maximizing damage. It's a really good argument for maximizing damage. So that is part of what motivates people to just try to maximize their damage. You can trust no men, no women, no beast. But steel. Steel you can trust. What does not work in endgame designs? Maximum damage? Yeah, the thing is, I think personally, like while we're on the subject of DPS checks and enrage timers, the purpose of the enrage timer, in my opinion, is a few things. The first thing is, if there was no enrage timer, then you could bring like 8 tanks, or like 2 healers and 6 tanks, or 4 healers and 4 tanks, if you like. You could just go full on defense mode if you wanted. You could just do that. Because the boss is going to die eventually. If you just understand how to do each mechanic step by step, and the boss just repeats them forever, then you could just go with a defensive team, like a more defensive team, and it completely invalidates DPS players, because the only thing DPS jobs would offer to the group is the ability to kill the boss faster. But at some point the boss runs out of mechanics. Another argument for enrage timers is, if there is no enrage timer in Final Fantasy XIV specifically, because we have an infinite amount of races by design. Because of that, if there is no enrage timer, then as long as you can get people back on their feet again, but over and over and over again, before everyone dies, you can stall the boss out. What? Did I miss a message here? Oh, who needs healers? 8-man warrior party. That sounds like a Taylor Swift concert. Only playing the short song, Shake It Off. Like, I mean, yeah, I guess. But yeah, if you have no enrage timer, then it means, 1, there is no particular reason to bring DPS players, DPS jobs. 2, someone dying is not a problem unless there's a body check coming up that requires 8 players. And 3, there is no particular incentive to get really good at whatever job you're playing, because the boss will die eventually. That is basically the argument of how casual boss fights typically go, right? Imagine a perpetual fight. Oh, what was that boss in Final Fantasy XI who people tried to fight for over 24 hours? Like, tried to brute force over 24 hours? I think it was over 24 hours. Not like as in they did it in a span of 24, but I believe it was more than 24 hours. Absolute Virtue, that's the one. Thank you, Ultimate Trainer. Could you imagine for a moment, if you will, sitting down with like multiple raid teams, like multiple raid teams, not as in multiple people in a raid team, like armies basically, and they're not even in your sleeveys, and the reason why you're bringing all these people is because the fight is so long that you need to have like switch duty. Like, we need, like, this raid team is fighting from this time to this time, and then we gradually move over to this team and over to this team, because people need to sleep and eat and like go in the bathroom or whatever. And that's the thing is, something that is really significant about Absolute Virtue is I'm pretty sure that brute force situation came about because people couldn't figure out how they were supposed to beat the boss. And if I remember correctly, the development team for the game put out a video demonstrating that it can be beaten. The problem is that the reason they could was because they were running on, you know, a latency suggesting they were next to the server, whereas most other people, you know, had a like significant delay. By the way, hey Ymir, hope you're doing well. So, because they couldn't like line up things well enough, it was like, and they didn't know intuitively how the boss was coded, so they didn't know exactly how the boss was supposed to be done. They tried to brute force it gradually. Alright, Alliance G, your shift starts tomorrow at 7 a.m. When an MMORPG starts feeling like a real job. Oh yeah, Absolute Virtue is in Baldessian Arsenal, right? Just slightly less chonky, I suppose. Yeah, I think things are going well. I hope you're doing well. And I could imagine it would be funny to try and beat a fight. In an unexpected way. Imagine waiting 2 hours for Warrior to solo the boss while everyone else is dead. I can't remember the exact context to this, but somewhat recently. I read this story with someone who was talking about how the report system actually works. The report system, you know, this one. Contact report. And the story was that they were doing, I believe it was P9. So, Cocytus, right? The eat, fight. You know the guy, you know the one. And this warrior in the group, supposedly, as the story went, intentionally managed to get everyone else in the raid dead. I've not done any clips yet, Ymir. And as you see in the pinned message, I was going to keep the clips that like people aren't there for. I'd try to postpone them, so don't you worry. So this warrior manages to get everyone else killed. My first thought reading that was, how did they manage that? Like that's incredible. I'm guessing they started by making sure all of the people that had a raise died, right? And then just gradually moved through killing everyone. Or maybe even better, they managed to get those, they managed to get the people that could raise killed, and then they themselves said, let's just wipe it. And then when everyone else intentionally died, he just didn't. And he basically tried to solo the boss from, like, 50% or something, and it was taking an absolute eternity, and while everyone else was asking him to wipe up so they could try again, he just refused. So everyone in the group just, you know, did this, and wrote it up. There is a advice in the support desk that it is even better if you can write the report while the problem is ongoing, if possible. And I would say that is the perfect, quintessential example of reporting someone while the incident is ongoing, right? And after a while, like a little while, that warrior just disappeared. Like, I don't think he even got kicked. Like, he disappeared from the group, but it didn't say anything about leave party or anything, but he just disappeared. Like, a GM just came in and plucked him out of existence. And the boss reset. So yeah, don't try and force people to watch you solo something. It's the Ariel says it needs people to do a fate outside of the arsenal to make Absolute Virtue more killable. I do think I remember hearing about these things, yeah. Bondi says, speaking of reports, back in Stormblood I had a tank get ripped out of my instance for GM jail during Forsaken 2 in God Kefka. What happened there? What? And this is why you try to be a good boy outside of raiding hours, so you don't get yoinked in the middle of Savage Raid. I'll keep that in mind, Ymir. Thanos snapped. Yeah, exactly. Thanos snapped out of P9. I think it was P9N, although though. Ymir says, who is the Eat Fight boss? It is Cocytus. It is P9. Hey, Yukarin. Hope you're doing well. Finished base Endwalker. Nice. Congratulations. Did you watch all of the credits? Or did you just watch some of them? That is not surprising, Bondi. I was more curious what got them ripped to GM jail. Exactly, the rabbiting boss. I do think, I'm going to stand by, I think it's very funny. Like, if any boss in a Savage Raid tier should say, eat, fight, it had to be the first boss. It has to be the first boss. As I said in my memorable boss fights, Cocytus just reminded the Week 1 Savage Raiders what they are going to do. Oh, fair enough, Bundy. I wasn't sure if you meant like it was like a static. It could have been. The Ultimate Trainer says, Absolute Virtue isn't actually killable if you don't do the support fate. We had Science doing all of the damage buffs, and they were stuck at 0.1% for 5 seconds. And then what? Like, did they just wipe after the 5 seconds? Or did it just heal back up? Just remember, Yukarin, that if you don't like Savage Raiding or the like, it is optional. There's so much other content you can enjoy as well. So you don't have to if you find it scary. Yeah, I'm guessing because if I remember correctly, in Final Fantasy XI, one of the things that made Absolute Virtue so absolutely insurmountable was because it had like a massive region. And I believe what really stopped the brute force strategy was, I believe it had benediction. I think I read something like that. At a certain HP percentage, it will just cast benediction, and of course you're supposed to do something to prevent that. But for anyone that don't know what that means, imagine you're in the middle of a Savage Raid boss and you have them almost dead, and the boss does this. Start over. Try again. Ah, okay. At some point it uses Benediction and Hollow Ground and then repeats its Enrage. Nice. Don't give Yoshi P ideas. I think they already spent it on Absolute Virtue. It would be underwhelming if they did it again, wouldn't it? As long as you're doing it for your own enjoyment, Yukarin. Just remember that if you get into Savage Raiding and you find out that you don't actually enjoy it, that, like, unlike some other MMOs, World of Warcraft for example, you can play so much of Final Fantasy XIV without actually Savage Raiding. So don't feel forced if you find out that you don't really enjoy it. Right, Blaine? I'll get to it in just a moment. Thanos snapped now by the boss. That is basically the general hard Enrage, is the boss just going, eh. Right, so let me just check my notes again. So Ymir said they had a little bit of a tight tight timing on when they can be here, so we'll probably start with that. And then I will probably... there are a few clips that are like seeking advice. I will try to prioritize those, and then we will do the ones that are like... I mean, like more like, see this cool thing. And I will make sure that I don't push your top clip again, Bundy. Don't you worry. But yeah, with that, the specific ones that asked for advice was Emir and Gassel. So we will start with Emir's clip. Let me see if I can find it. That's the one. Man. And what was the note? I found myself almost dying a ton on trash pulls. Is there anything I should have done differently? And you're a Dark Knight. I have a feeling I know where this is going. That's fair, Yukanin. I'm just saying, don't let it ruin your enjoyment of the game if you find out you don't actually like savage rating, right? Like that's ultimately what I'm trying to get at here. Whoops. No sound. Right. So that looks mostly fine. What, if we're going to be really nitpicky here, just really nitpicky here, you could use Flood of Shadow here. You have full MP and no dark side. But just mentioning that, if you had full MP, you could use Flood of Shadow, and then you did it there. You don't have a defensive cooldown running. You should probably use TBN, like, now, I would say. Probably also Shadow Wall. But certainly TBN. I will not focus too much on the GCD or OGCD situation offensively, because you specifically said you had problems surviving, so that's not particularly important how much damage you're doing for that. And you used Living Dead. Well, if that was your plan, then there's no reason to have used Shadow Wall and all that. However, if you're going into a pull as Warrior or Dark Knight, and your intention is to start with your invulnerability, it's extremely smart to let your healer know that you're doing that. You know, okay. I'll still say it so that everyone else who's watching who does not know it might get the value of this little nugget of information. If you're going to use your invulnerability, that is worthless if you don't drop to 1 HP. It helps a lot if you just run it by the healer real quick. So the healer knows, oh, you don't want me to just kitchen sink you with heals because you're not using cooldowns. Like, at this moment, actually, let me see. At this moment, this very point in the fight, if I was your healer and I didn't know you, I would be like, is the tank using any defensives? You do another GCD, still no defensives. Another GCD, then you use Living Dead. If I was Sage and healing you, I would have been like, just throwing everything to keep you alive, and then complain potentially afterwards, after the pull, if it was particularly difficult. But by the time you used Living Dead, I would already be Living Dead as a healer, because, like, I see your healer as a white mage. If your healer is a barrier healer, then they need to keep you above that threshold where you used Living Dead, because they can't bring you back up if you're down there. Like, they can't save you from there. White mage can. In fact, if you dropped even lower, there's a chance the white mage just goes benediction, speaking of absolute virtue, right? And yeah, you could like make a chat macro. The thing is, and the important thing that Gazel remembers to mention, say it before you start the pull, not after. And thank you, 5 Daydreams. Indeed, kitchen sinking suggests throwing every single cooldown you have. Sorry for using lingo like that without explaining it. Kitchen sinking is basically, it's saying you throw everything but the kitchen sink, ironically, because you used everything you have. But yeah, the best you can do if you're going to use an invulnerability for the pull, and this actually also applies for Gunbreakers and Paladins, because that saves the healer from worrying about you. Like, oh, you're going to use an invuln before I have to do something, so I'll just wait. Like, just make that macro. You're like, I'm going to use my invulnerability, so don't heal me before it's done. Like, just say, like, on the next pull, this is happening. Like, as a little heads up. It helps the healer a ton, if they respect it. Like, the thing is, it's not going to help all healers. Some healers are just going to ignore it. But the healers that care will appreciate it, me included. And Amokius, specifically with Dark Knight, I would heavily advise against using a defensive cooldown while you're still rounding up mobs. In general, it's a little wasteful to use a cooldown while you're still rounding up mobs. Let me explain to you why that is. Notice how much HP Ymir has here. Around 99k. Now a regen came up. While Ymir was running to the next pack, they basically took no damage because the mobs couldn't reach. So if you had used Rampart there, you would have just wasted like 4 or 5 seconds of Rampart, because it was being used on nothing. And Dark Knight, specifically Dark Knight, is particularly stingy on its defensive cooldowns because it doesn't have as many as the others, and because TPN scales, like stacks positively with other defensive cooldowns. You want to use TPN anyway, regardless of whether you have Rampart up or not. So, like, that's why I would suggest you save your defensive cooldowns until you've reached a standstill. Because Sprint is a defensive cooldown. If you watch my, my more recent solo challenge streams, you'll see that the time where I'm taking the least damage is while I'm sprinting. Like, I literally just run around the arena to minimize the damage I'm taking, and the time where that is most effective is during sprint. It is possible that some of the mobs have ranged attacks, and depending on how many of them have ranged attacks, it might be helpful, but usually it is better to save your defensive cooldowns until everyone's here, right? There are exceptions, there are always exceptions, but in your average dungeon, it's better to save your defensive cooldowns till everything's rounded up. But yeah, as you can also hear from some of the healer mains in the chat, they would also be a little miffed that you dropped that low without saying a thing. But as Ymir said, I forgot. Fair enough, and we don't keep stomping around on that. We talked about that. And hey, Gleaming, hope you're doing well. You can talk more about using Sprint as a defensive cooldown. Does that go for bosses at all? Would that hurt uptime? Yes, using Sprint as a defensive cooldown immediately hurts uptime for basically everyone, except ranged players. That's why you typically don't see the warrior run laps around the arena when they're doing a big AoE pull, because it loses everyone DPS, basically. But if you have to, running away is technically a defensive cooldown. In a boss fight, it is also a defensive cooldown. It is just less so, because often the boss is like, I mean, you're dodging 1 or 2 auto attacks, right? That's fine. I'll just use my stack marker mechanic now. And that one you can't avoid. And then I'll do a spread marker mechanic. And you losing uptime and other people losing uptime because you're running the boss around the menagerie might not be great. Sometimes you can postpone a tank buster or something by running away. What if I invuln the stack marker? I mean, then you've used an invuln. So just want to highlight here that Ymir did use a defensive cooldown once Living Dead ended. You should still use TBN. You did now. You could use Flood of Shadow. You're like generally you should be a little bit more upfront with using your MP, I think. Like if you're at 10k, you should use Flood of Shadow. Bimo says, if you invuln in a stack, does your portion of the damage still get split amongst teammates? If you're in a stack of 8 players and one of them is invulnerable, an eighth of the damage goes to you and gets set to 0. If you're in a stack marker alone and you use an invuln, then you just don't take any damage. A unique, and let me just finish that before I go on with this. I will get a little bit faster with this. I will get faster. We're just taking some of these things right now because it came up. The invulnerability is a little unique in the way that it's programmed. It appears normally defensive cooldowns actually add a multiplier to the damage that you're taking, like a negative multiplier, right? If you have Shadow Wall on, then it reduces the damage of the attack by 30%. Invulnerabilities don't do that. And that's why if you invuln an attack with a nasty dot on it, once your invuln ends, it does full damage, as if you had no defensive cooldown on, if you had nothing else. So you don't want to invuln a thing with a nasty dot unless you can invuln the whole thing, preferably, right? Because of that, the reason for that is that the way invuln works is that it just you go through all of the math of figuring out how much damage the attack does, and then right at the end, Hallowed Ground just says damage equals 0. Just right at the end, the last row, it just sets it to 0 as the last step in the equation. So that means you can soak damage while invulnerable, because you can still take your part of the damage. And you can still get hit by, if a debuff can be applied even though you took 0 damage from the attack, sometimes a debuff is applied because you took damage. Then, that's a different story. But if you get a debuff that is related to the damage you took, then the invuln is unrelated to that. It doesn't care. It's just, it's not actually a damage multiplier. It just sets the damage to 0. It doesn't even multiply it by 0. It just says damage equals 0, effectively. It doesn't change it just says that damage doesn't work right now. This is further emphasized by the weirdness that is that cover can't actually, cover damage cannot be invulned. If you have Hallowed Ground up and you use cover on someone, you will still take the damage. Really weird. It's quite weird. Now that you don't have Living Dead, I'm very interested to see what you're going to do for this pull. You could still use Flood of Shadow there. You used Abyssal Drain. I suppose you can. You use TBN and Oblation. That's pretty fine. And there's a Flood of Shadow just in time. And another one. Great. And then, wait, how long was it gone? Was that perfectly timed? Just about. Just about. Do you use TBN again? Do you use TBN again? TBN again? Oh boy. Oh boy. There was a benediction. I think you dropped really low because the white mage was fishing for that. They just decided to just wait. Thank you very much, Skeleton King. A very interesting way to put it. Thank you. And may you also be blessed. Thank you. So far, I have 2 suggestions. The first one is, of course, that you should use TBN on cooldown when you're tanking like a massive pack like this, Ymir. That one, first of all, highly recommend that one. The second one is I would recommend, it's like a really minor thing, this, but I would recommend using Rampart before Oblation, just like how I would recommend Shadow Wall before Oblation. Like, you could have used Shadow Wall and then Oblation in the first pack, you'd used Rampart and then Oblation on the second pack, and then the cooldown order thing wouldn't be as much of an issue. But yeah, TBN on cooldown would be nice. Ymir says the White Mage gets to decide to Benediction, but I can't decide to Living Dead. Correct! I know it sounds ridiculous, but the reason is, if you're not getting heals, then your approach is either A, just trust your healer knows what they're doing, and just continue with whatever you were doing, or B, kitchen sink. You know, all the defensive cooldowns to try and save yourself. You could have done that. The thing is, as far as the White Mage is concerned, either option works for them. If you kitchen sink, they don't care, they'll just use Benediction later. If you don't kitchen sink, they'll use Benediction earlier. On the other hand, if you're Living Dead and the White Mage isn't ready for that, their only option is to kitchen sink. Like, just healing, because they don't realize that that's what's going on, right? So the problem is that the White Mage can just choose to react to what you're doing, but they have to react to what you're doing. On the other hand, to some degree, you can't do that much in reaction to what the healer's doing. Like, you can't actually do very much. You can just tank as best as you can, and you will probably die if the healer isn't helping you, and that is just how it's going to be. That's just flat and final. That's just how it's going to be. And I'm just speeding through this because we were primarily thinking about AoE pulls in your question. But that is exactly as Gazel says. That is why you say it. That's why you say, I'm going to use Living Dead. The first pull was optional because it was feeding the Blood Lily. Don't White Mage just start with 0 Blood Lilies when they start a dungeon? That was a joke. Fair enough. But yeah, it's weird. It's the same reason why, and I've talked about this before, you might think as a warrior, I don't need to use Bloodwedding. I'll just wait until I'm near death and then I'll use Bloodwedding and it'll be the most effective. The thing is, your healer, what they're seeing is an idiot who isn't using defensive cooldowns at all. So they're going kitchen sink, kaboom, using all cooldowns, and when you finally drop to near death, healer's empty. So I hope for you that your assumption that you didn't need the healer as a warrior is true, because now the healer's done. And they can't help you anymore. And the only way to alleviate that is by either saying to the healer that you're going to do it this way so that they know beforehand, or alternatively, and this is what I recommend, just use Bloodwedding first. Like, just use Bloodwedding first. Just use it as your first defensive cooldown. It's hallowed ground for 8 seconds. That's what it does. Just view it as hallowed ground for 8 seconds. It's better to use it early because then you can use it again. So you just use Hallowed Ground for 8 seconds, and then when Hallowed Ground ends, you use a different defensive, like Vengeance, and then when that is over, you can use Hallowed Ground again, because Warrior's busted. But if you don't use super low cooldown Hallowed Ground, it'll not come off cooldown again. because it's already off. And as Gazel says, the healer doesn't know you're going to invuln if you don't say anything. That is, of course, something you can alleviate with a macro, as you said, you know, Emir. But the point is, that's why you, as a tank, the best you can do as a tank is being extremely predictable, like incredibly predictable. That's why, just going to this, it seemed like this pull was mostly fine. But let me just rewind it, because I wasn't actually giving it the attention that you wanted. That's why my advice for like a warrior is use Bloodwetting first, then use a defensive to tide you over, then use Bloodwetting again. My advice for Dark Knight is use TBN on cooldown, and then like pair it with cooldowns in a predictable order, in a predictable manner. Because if you're playing predictably, you're playing in a way where the healer can look at what you're doing and see that you're doing the same thing every time, then they can plan their healing around what you're doing. And then the white mage won't have to like panic benediction you because they didn't expect it, or something else. Maybe this, like the sage won't have to suddenly go, oh, Zoe Neuma, and just fully heal you up quickly because they don't expect it. If you as a tank play in a predictable way, then your healer will play better. And one of the biggest advantages to being predictable is your healer's less likely to cast Cure 2 and more likely to cast Holy, which is going to kill the pack faster, and then you all get to finish faster. And that is also true, Amokus. That is also why I'm like, going again. So you use Unleash. If I was the tank in this situation, the thing is I don't think I've done this particular dungeon as Dark Knight, but if it were me, I would go Unleash, Flood of Shadow. In fact, I would go Unleash here, move over here, Flood of Shadow into the pack, and then maybe use Stalwart Soul. The reason for the order is if you use Stalwart Soul at full MP, then you lose 600 MP. The reason why I say maybe Stalwart Soul is because if I'm playing a different tank, I will most of the time do a 2-step AoE combo on that many mobs. Because it means that if I have like a really trigger-happy DPS, maybe I have a summoner who really likes to front-load their damage, that happens sometimes, I will still be able to hold aggro if I do 2 AoE attacks instead of just 1. But Dark Knight has Flood of Shadow, which is just as good as an AoE GCD attack, like the Feeler ones. So you just do Unleash, Flood, move. Way faster and smoother than a warrior in my case. But that would be my suggestion there, and that also coincides with what Amokius says. And so here, TBN, Shadow Wall. TBN, Shadow Wall. TBN, Shadow Wall. TBN, Shadow Wall. Come on. Will you do it? There was TBN. Nice. Were you about to? What happened there? Did you miss? Did you miss the Shadow Wall click? There it was. TBN is ready again. TBN, come on. You can do it. Well, at this point, the mobs are mostly dead, so it's probably fine. TBN is way too expensive. TBN costs the same as Flood and Edge of Shadow. And if you use it right, you get a full refund. So that means it costs nothing. Yeah, so my advice, just to be clear, is I'm not saying you should use Flood of Shadow. You can hear I'm specifically saying TBN. And whenever you use TBN, the only time I'm looking at your MP or thinking about your MP is if you reach 10k. If you reach 10k, I'm thinking you should be using Flood of Shadow now. But the moment TBN is ready again, I'm sitting there like, TBN time. Because if you imagine how much healing the other tanks get from their short cooldown, TBN doesn't heal, but it indirectly heals by making it so you don't take damage, right? So it heals for 25% of your max HP. That's not nearly as much as what the other tanks can heal with theirs, I think, but it's a lot considering it's just 15 seconds of cooldown. Like, by the time a Gunbreaker can use Heart of Corundum again, you already have had 2 TBNs for 50% of your HP. Which is a lot more when you think about it like that. Like, you're basically healing yourself for 25% of your HP, assuming the shield is spent. And once again, I'm sitting here thinking, TBN? You can also use TBN and Abyssal Drain for an emergency heal. 5 Daydream says, doesn't TBN also take mitigation percent into consideration? TBN itself doesn't do anything with your mitigation, but mitigation is what's a good way? Let me see here. Let's see, blue should work. So if you have Rampart, then you take 20% less damage, right? That means you are taking 80% damage. That is the same as if you had 100% of your HP, you divide that by 80%, and that is equal to 125% of what we call effective HP. So if you have TBN active at full HP, then you already have 125% of your HP. But if we just ignore this part, because we're only interested in this part, the TBN itself, these lights are a little obnoxious, and divide that by 80%. Then you get 31.25%, which means Rampart plus TBN. Can you see this? Yes, you can. TBN equals 31.25% effective shield. That's how it interacts with your percentage mitigation. Technically, this of course also means that you're like, you can view it as you have 25% shield and you take 20% less damage, or you can view it as you have 31% shield. And TBN has a 15-second cooldown. I'm having a flashback to math classes all of a sudden. But yeah, that's basically the reason why you want to use TBN on cooldown when doing a big AoE pull. It's a different story on a boss fight because you can't be sure that the entire shield is actually spent if you're just using it when the boss is just auto-attacking. However, if the boss is about to do a big attack, you are certain to spend most of it at least. In fact, if you're in a situation where DPS isn't crucially important, then it is, in my opinion, actually more worthwhile to use TBN on cooldown than worrying about using Flood of Shadow. You should have the MP to do that without, like, no problem. Don't worry about it, Emir. You asked for advice, so we're learning. I'm just repeating the things. So don't feel bad. Like, the key thing is whether you're learning from this, right? And yeah, Yucadian, it's actually a really good thing to play other roles to learn how they think. Like, if you have complained about black mages greeding too hard on mechanics and such, try and play black mage for a bit. One day you'll understand. C5 Daydream says, on the topic of shields versus heals, I've heard many times that regions are stronger than shields for repeated small hits of raid wives. Why is that? So the benefit of a shield is that you can have more than your actual max HP for the attack. And the way shields are designed in Final Fantasy XIV, they're designed to be very expensive, if that makes sense. Like, what's a good example of this? What is a good example of this? It's going to be a little hard for me to explain because Astrologian was a perfect example of this back in Shadowbringers. To put it like a little crude, but long story short, in Shadowbringers, if you were in Diurnal Sect, that meant you were in pure healer mode, like how Astrologian is now, then Aspected Benefic healed basically for what it says now. If you were in Nocturnal Sect, it healed, like the upfront healing was the same, but the shield was like a third, or maybe like a third to a half of what the region would have been. And also Aspected Benefic was more expensive in Nocturnal Sect. So basically, everything that makes Aspected Benefic really, really mana efficient was gone to pay for the fact that it gave a shield. So Ymir says a good example would be Adlocurium. It is a decent example. Adlocurium costs 1000 MP. If we just for a moment ignore the crit interaction, Adlocurium gives, let me just see here, it heals for 300 potency and gives a shield of 540 potency, effectively speaking. So 840 potency for 1000 MP. Cure 2 just heals for 800 potency for the same MP. The core difference being that if Adlocurium's duration runs out, 540 potency of the healing just goes into the ether. It's not the best example, but it gets even crazier when you compare to like Regen, which heals for 1500 potency over 18 seconds. So I think the reason for like the origin for this claim 5 Daydreams is that regions are cheaper, and if it is a matter of many small hits, then you can use your HP bar for the hits. Like you can take 20k, 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 you can survive that and heal in between them. But if a mechanic hits you for 80k, then you need a barrier, you need a shield, and you need damage reduction just to survive the hit, which would make the region kind of irrelevant, right? Now, for the last time here. That's fine. You weren't at full MP anyways. I'm not going to ask about the Flood of Darkness. Unleash. TBN. Shadow Wall. Shadow Wall. TBN. You're at full MP. You have to do something. Flood comes out. TBN. I'm not going to say it anymore. But yeah, like this is like I'm just saying this is how I would think as a Dark Knight in your situation, Ymir, is you go in, TBN. Is TBN on cooldown? Like on a big AoE pool, basically you would probably want to use TBN every time the boss uses a tank buster. In a pack like this, you're just under fire from a constant tank buster, like just an endless stream of tank buster, just. So you want to use TBN on cooldown. Like that, like if you try and picture it like that, a pack like this is one continuous tank buster. So what would you do on a continuous tank buster? You'd probably use TBN. And that is also a good idea, Mokius. I like that is something I sometimes do. I usually like if I'm like trying to optimize, I'll do that, but I don't always do it. I don't really demand that people do that because it can confuse. Like, if you're still learning, you might confuse yourself from something that is more important. So I don't like go, oh, you're not using your GCD. Like, right now we're focusing on the defensive cooldown situation here. Flood, TPN. And yet, that is also a thing, as Ymir says. If you have aggro on everything, then you're fine. Then the extra on mens is just a slight free damage, right? Free because you wouldn't be able to land anything else while you're running. But yeah, that's also something that is important, Tentacles, because exactly, like before this, I was just talking about all of the weird like mistakes that I've seen like really new tanks do, and Ymir's not doing those. The reason why I'm focusing on the things I'm focusing on is because Ymir's doing mostly alright, right? Like, this is something that I usually remember to say, that the more nitpicky and specific my advice is, the better you're probably playing. Like, the less I have to talk about. But a common thing that I know Ymir has some trouble with, because we've gone over this with Gunbreaker as well, is making sure to use the short defensive cooldown like a lot. Like that's like a thing that we've had to go over. So it doesn't surprise me that the problem also exists when they're playing Dark Knight. So we just take it one more time, right? We just do it one more time. That's the thing. We're here to learn, right? I mean, yeah, Unment reduces the cooldown of Plunge. Anyone been using Unment for that? The enhanced Unment? Oh. You could probably have used TPN for the spread there. And also, yes, as Peter says, it's not easy to like put yourself out there as well. That's also why I don't want it to be, I don't want you to feel like I'm like dunking on you or I'm disappointed in you. I'm just trying to give advice. And if you're making the same mistake 50 times in a clip, then you're making that mistake 50 times. Maybe I'll say it multiple times, but the reason why I'm saying it is just to drive home how important it is that you remember. And yeah, Zach says you have a surprising amount of cooldowns as a Dark Knight, so the more of them you use, the better. But I would really say if you can just nail down, you pull a pack, and you use Shadow Wall and TPN. As soon as you reach the destination, you use Shadow Wall and TPN. And then when Shadow Wall ends, you use Oblation and probably TPN again. And then if Oblation ends, you look around for what you do next. But just start with that, and then in the second pack, you do Rampart, TPN, and then TPN, and then Oblation. And, like, the rest comes after that. Like, it comes after. But just, like, focus on that for the defensive stuff. And no need to get too fancy with the Living Dead stuff. I really do recommend, like, if you can just nail down using TPN a lot on AoE pulls, you will probably do much better. Alright? Ymir, I think Zach was suggesting that Zach was a tank main. Or a Dark Knight main. Yes, you can ask a question on any job, Peter. Any job you like, and I'll try my best to answer. Gazel says, my clip would probably give headache to tank mains in chat. Well, it's coming up now. So, you write your question, Peter. I'll get to it. But I'll start on this. Let's see. I happen to remember that a few people gave Gazel some advice in the clip review chat. I'm just I don't know how many of you are in the chat, but I'll just say it here. You are absolutely welcome to watch someone's clip in the clip review and give them advice. But could you like just tag them in the classroom instead? There's like the reason why there's slow mode in the clip review is specifically so that you don't have like a huge conversation to scroll through to find the clips. Not to be mean or anything. That's why I didn't say anything in the moment, because I'd rather you give each other advice than like prohibit it. But it would be much better for everyone, because then you could easily discuss the advice you're giving if you do it in the classroom. Like, you just, Gazel posts a clip, you want to give advice to them, you tag them in the classroom. You could even like copy the link to the message and just say, I was watching your clip, here's my advice. Like, not mad at anyone, just saying it would probably work better for yourself and for me if you leave it there. On the other hand, if you had just talked in the classroom, I wouldn't have been able to read your advice to Gazel. So let me just start with that. So Tristan said to Gazel, I would suggest trying to space out your mitigations. I would start with Sentinel, and when it runs out, use Rampart, maybe with Reprisal. I'll get back to that one. Also keep in mind that both the DPS here are also leveling, since they're not synced, so they might not have had great gear, so mobs died slower than perhaps otherwise. Good advice. If you're having trouble having enough cooldowns to get stuff done, like before you run out, like if things are not dying before you run out of cooldowns, it is possible it's a damage issue, and it might help if you pull less, or you pull more carefully because someone else is underperforming. So that is very, very possible. And let's see, Nilix also suggests not kitchen sinking. Let's see, Gazel says they were using level 45 job gear for the most part. It's probably fine. I don't think your gear would be the issue if your gear is around level 45 for the most part. But yeah, if you're level appropriate gear, then you probably lack accessories, because A Realm Reborn was really stingy about that, right? And Shara also pointed that out. Right, so the reason why I said I would get back to the thing about Rampart and Sentinel and Reprisal is because I would recommend that, like, if you're wall-to-wall pulling, use Sentinel. You're a Paladin, so start with Sheltron, then when that runs out, Sentinel, then when that runs out, use Reprisal. By that point, most of the mobs should be dead. You could even use Sheltron again if they're not. Like, use Rampart and Sheltron. The reason why I'm specifically saying don't use Rampart is because then you have Rampart to do the same thing on the next pack. That is also why I'm saying maybe Sheltron, because if you use 2 Sheltrons in one pack, you might not actually have another Sheltron for the next pack to open with. Like, spread it out, but specifically Sentinel and Rampart, if you can, split them. Like, not in the same pool. Right. Hey, Bits. Hope you're doing well. And you are Nilix. Well, perfect timing for you to show up. And hey, Zyrian. Ziran. Hope you're doing well. And hope you're doing well as well, Bits. And Snail says, wanted a newish player here. I want to thank you for that healer guide. Thanks for letting me know what kitchen sinking means. Welcome to Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm glad my guide helped you. So Peter asked, I've heard arguments that giving a 3% buff on a ranged or a caster is better than 6% buff on the tank. Right, so what Peter's asking is, should I cast my melee cards on the ranged DPS, or should I cast it on the tank if I don't have a melee DPS? Right? So the most accurate answer is it depends on how much damage your tank or your ranged DPS are doing, but officially you can't know that. You can't possibly know that. I would say if your tank seems to know what they're doing, then I would give the melee card to the tank in a dungeon context. If your tank does not appear to know what they're doing, then it might be better to give the melee card to the DPS. There's also a possibility that the tank just, like maybe one of the ranged DPS just has insanely good gear. So you could give the card to them. It's a complicated thing because ultimately the question is the tank doing more than 50% of the damage the ranged DPS is doing? If yes, then the tank will give the group more general benefit. And tanks are absolutely capable of doing like 2/3 of the damage of a DPS, like any DPS, pretty much, generalized, of course. A selfish DPS can usually do significantly more DPS than a supportive DPS, but if your two DPS are like, I don't know, a bard and a red mage, there's a reasonable chance that the tank can like live up to the expectations to make themselves worthy of that card, assuming they know what they're doing. Now, the difficult part is that you might not be able to determine whether the tank knows what they're doing, and the only way you would be able to know it is by researching tanks or playing them. My suggestion, if you're not too sure, is the power difference overall should be very small, and it is more likely that the tank will get more value out of it than the ranged will get more value out of it in that specific context. So just ignoring everything else, I would recommend giving the melee card to the tank. Like, if you're not sure, just give the melee card to the tank. I hope that helps. Also, hey Nikolai, hope you're doing well. Nate Corin, hope you're doing well. And also, as Amokia says, Paladin or Gunbreaker can also do huge amounts of damage. All 4 tanks have very, very respectable bursts. In fact, if the Paladin is lucky, if a Paladin is... Thank you for tuning in, Emilia. Hope you have a good evening. If your Paladin is lucky, they will do more damage than... Well, they will potentially do more damage than a warrior, because while Paladin doesn't have the advantage of guaranteed critical hits or critical direct hits, Confiteor does 920 potency, and Primal Rend is only 700. So if Confiteor actually crit direct hits, then it will do more damage, almost certainly. And I say almost because in relation to the video from yesterday, Test Your Claims, Primal Rend would garner additional damage bonus from direct hit chance on your gear because of how the game works. So Primal Rend might do slightly more damage than just 700 potency as a baseline, but Paladin would be able to do more damage if they're lucky. The keyword being if. Right? So that's why you can't rely on it. Gleaming says, quick question about Black Mage. I know there's a weaving opportunity after Fire 3, Blizzard 3, and instant casts, but should I start my GCD for sharp cast or ley lines on cooldown? Lower level, you might have to do that because there might be such a massive distance between your next opportunity that you would rather use ley lines as a hard, in a GCD and delay your GCD, right? But as you get to higher level, you will have more instant casts. In regards to the Fire 3, Blizzard 3 thing, something that you should keep in mind is if you have a decent amount of spell speed and you're in ley lines, it is very possible that the weaving opportunity as you switch disappears. Like, the GCD window becomes so incredibly small that you can't weave anything reasonably. It happens to me as well. So, like, if you're in ley lines, sure, you can weave a thing. It'll not clip your GCD that much, but it might. So if you can weave the thing at a different time, do that. But that is more irrelevant at higher level. Bits asks, wait, hang on. I thought you said yesterday that gear didn't actually boost guaranteed crits, just buffs to crit rate. That is correct. I said direct hit rate just now. Specifically direct hit rate. So the key difference between critical hit and direct hit rate is, first of all, that look at this chonker. This is a direct hit tooltip. This is the crit tooltip. The reason why the direct hit tooltip is such a chonker is because the direct hit tooltip explains that as you increase your direct hit, you increase your chance to do direct hits, which do slightly more damage, but it also says if an attack is guaranteed to direct hit, then it will instead increase the damage of the attack. Instead, critical hit does not have this property, and actions that are guaranteed critical or direct hits will say damage dealt is increased when under an effect that raises critical hit rate or direct hit rate. What this means is if your warrior were to be blessed by the gods and be handed devilment, Dancer has given Dobby a devilment, that would make primal rend hit really hard. Like, really hard. But usually don't give it to the warrior, right? It's usually better to give it to, like, I don't know, the samurai. But it specifically buffs work universally. But stats, it's only crit rate that has this property built in. Right? I saw from different comments that my section in the video on specifically the guaranteed critical hits wasn't perfectly clear. So I'll take that's on me. That's on me. But hopefully this clears things up. Right. So I feel like did I probably answer your question, Gleaming? Wait, what level is your Paladin, Gassel? What's happening? I thought you were like level 45 or something, or 46. You already have all the things on the pass. You're ready. You're ready to rumble. Right. So just Gassel's actual question was included the healer scholar was able to keep up in the run before this, so I was doing big pulls and it went terribly. I rarely but do have seen some great tanks doing these big pulls and taking way less damage, so really want to know how. So the first thing that is really significant is that in this level range, Paladin might be like the underdog tank. Like, that is very possible. Maybe not so much on AoE, but Paladin is like, if you compare it to Gunbreaker, in this dungeon, Gunbreaker has camouflage, you don't have bulwark. Gunbreaker, granted, does not have Heart of Stone, and you have Sheltron, but Gunbreaker has Aurora. Warrior has Thrill of Battle. Dark Knight, well, they have Stalwart Soul, so they can do more damage to compensate. They don't, like, again, Dark Knight might be slightly weaker on the defensive side, but might be a lot stronger on the offensive side, so they can, like, deal with the packs faster. So there's multiple things. Like, if you don't know what jobs the people were playing, that could play a factor. If I remember correctly, let me just, can I find the map for Smail Darkhold? Can I just go to the dungeon and look it up, maybe? Nope. Sometimes you can with these things. Anyone know where Smail Darkhold is? Is it here? There it is. What? I haven't fully explored Smail Darkhold, apparently. What? Weird. So you are here. You are here. I'm pretty sure from memory that there's another one of those light crystals here. Menta exposed. I'm pretty sure there's another one of those light crystals here. Like, I'm pretty sure. The reason why that's important is because, and I'm pretty sure you know that, Gazel, because you actually tanked the mobs in the light crystal, which is nice. If you stood in that, you could tank like an actual like entire army and you'd probably still be fine. So my recommendation, if you're doing a big AoE pull, is like all the way up here. Just pull everything. The only one that might be annoying is that there's one of those like balloons, like soul balloon things, that will just shoot at you from outside the crystal's light. But like you can try and like pull a little further, like to the edge, to see if you can get the balloon into the crystal's light. The point is, you want to get over here as quickly as possible. Like, because it's so free, because you're basically impervious to damage, that would be better. This is of course like a minor detail. You might. The way the crystal's light works, Mokius, is that it gives you a buff that makes you take nearly no damage. And, well, it specifically has the effect of making the boss in the, that comes up later, the first boss, take damage. It doesn't do anything for the enemies, it specifically makes you take nearly no damage. Which is why the eye blasts do nearly no damage while you're standing in them. It's quite smart. Yes, Bimo says it's primarily that is the reason. The weirdest part about that, Nekokangi, is that I'm pretty sure I have seen the first button done, seen the door open, and just went, well, that's a side path, and just moved on. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I've had the opportunity to do it. Yeah, so that's the balloon I'm talking about. Really awkward. And, oh, you did try that. That's nice. See, that worked. That was very, very well done. That was pretty well done. There's not much to say about the defensives in this room. Something that I would like to point out, just scrolling back to the point where I could see the mob. That guy, he's also in Sastasha. He's a little different here. He learned a new trick. But those guys, those anglerfish dudes there, I think they're called like Oboron or Orobon or something like that in English. They always have something incredibly mean. And you know the gremlins from Holminster Switch that slow you down, they are also the ones that give you the discomfort debuff in Great Gobal Library. Some mobs just have this signature feature of being like really mean. And these are one of them. In Sastasha, this anglerfish gives everyone around it, all enemies, a damage buff. Like, it has a rate buff in Sastasha. It has a rate buff. Here, it's a little nicer because it only gives your tank a physical vulnerability debuff that your healer needs to use Asuna on, and the reason why so many tanks die in that room with the frogs is because of this jerk, as Amokius put it. This jerk just puts that sneaky physical vulnerability on you while the healer's there just spamming Cure 2 when they don't have a GCD to help you. And then you die, and you're sitting there like, it's the frogs. Cancel him on Twitter. I just wanted to mention that, and then what made me remember that is that Gazel got the debuff. Right there. That's the one. So if you're ever healing this dungeon, now you know. It's not particularly important in this pack because the tank is basically impervious to damage anyway, but it comes up later, and it's important later. There's also, by the way, another one of those fish here. Nice, very good. If you can, I don't know if you did, but if you can get like a shield lob on this guy or a provoke, that would be really nice, because you will have a lot of trouble actually like aggroing it from here. This is also, if you remember my video on tips to run dungeons faster, in this particular case, it might actually be beneficial for everyone if the Black Mage just focused this guy. Because what's going to happen is you're going to kill these guys, and then the rest of the group is going to be like, uh-oh, now you have to run out into the danger, and oh no, there's a mob. It went fine, but it could have gone slightly, it might have gone, like, ultimately gone slightly faster. Oh, apparently YouTube decided to not preload the things while I had the video in the bag for an hour or so. Let me just do this. Are you experiencing interruptions? Yes. I wonder why. Poor internet connection exposed. No! My interwebs! It's always funny when it goes, are you experiencing interruptions? Yes, I wonder why. And the reason why I'm not focusing too much on your defensive cooldown usage here is, of course, because the light crystal makes it kind of impossible for me to suggest very much here. But I have a good feeling of when there were problems. You, Gazel, you mentioned that a different healer had no problems keeping you alive earlier. Was it also in this dungeon? Like, was it the same dungeon? And you were also a paladin? Oof. It's a really weird fight, this. It's very easy to solo, by the way. Because the crystal light makes you impervious to damage, and it just keeps lighting new crystals throughout the fight. And all of them adds, they spawn at specific HP thresholds. It's very easy. Same dungeon, also paladin. Okay. So then I need to watch what are you doing, and what's the healer doing? What's the white mage doing different? And this is, I'm pretty confident this is probably the pull. This is like the killer pull for a lot of people. Can I do this? I really want to see. Can you all see who that is? Can you see who that is? It's the jerk. He's right there. He survived. The 2 previous times you killed him in the dungeon was just a minor setback. He's still alive. He's here to give you a physical vulnerability debuff. So usually, because in the previous pools there were no frogs, people tend to focus on the fact that there are frogs in this pool and they're probably the problem. It used to be the case, but they removed the part of the map you can fall down into if the frogs like pull you or push you. So that is no longer a threat. The problem is the jerk. The question is, so this might have been unneeded, but looking at your HP, if we just run it back real quick. What's the white mage doing? You're using Sentinel, you have Regen. You healed a little bit from Regen. What did the white mage do? Was that arrow? I'm guessing it was arrow because it didn't look like they cast anything on you. They used swift cast for... Is that Cura? I hope it is. They're casting it again. It's a little difficult because I don't know the Japanese names for the actions. That one, I'll say that was pretty smart. Good call on the stun on the frog. Has the jerk done? Oh, there it is. There it is. Now the healer has to use a Suna on you. This is part of the reason why I was like, maybe you should not have used both Sentinel and Rampart, because if that is still up in 5 seconds, then you have a problem. And you have used Reprisal, Sentinel, Rampart. You don't have Sheltron available. What do you have left? You don't have arm's length. That was used in a previous pull, I think. The cast with cast bar on the party list was stone. Ah. I see that on the animation there as well now. Oh no. Oh, you made it. And you got a Sheltron off. Yeah, now you're in the situation that because you went full kitchen sink, you don't really have anything. You can just AoE and hope. You used a healing potion. It was better than nothing. I think the thing you could have done differently, if we just wind it back here, is even if you drop below 50% HP, sometimes a thing you have to do as a tank is just like squeeze really hard and just cross your fingers. Well, maybe don't do that literally because you're going to need your hands to play the game. But just stick to your guns and do what you have to do and just hope that the healer knows. Because if you use Sentinel and Rampart, then you don't have anything for the rest of the fight. Like, you needed the Rampart in 11 seconds. But what happened is you dropped below about 50% HP, and then you used Rampart in possibly in a panic, I'm guessing, and then you used Reprisal as others suggested. You went full kitchen sink, and the downside to full kitchen sink is now you don't have anything for the rest. Like, if you're going full kitchen sink, it's like an all-in in like a strategy game. You're going all in, hoping that this will be enough. Speaking of enough, I'm guessing you were panicking, particularly because you were not using fight or flight. Because you were too focused on trying to hold on. Now you use fight or flight, now that you were at full HP again. And now you started getting smart with the leg sweep or low blow. But the problem is that you needed Rampart when the healer wasn't ready for the vulnerability. I think. Wait, did they remove it? Wait, sorry. See, debuff appears there. Do they remove it? They do remove it. Did they use Cure 1? Were they using Cure 1 in this situation? I'm sorry I'm spending so much time on this specific clip, but I'm guessing this is like the particular problem. There's the Swift cast. I'm guessing that was Cure 2. I'm hoping that was Cure 2 at least. And there was the Asuna. That was the Cure 1. That was the that was when it all went wrong, when they relaxed for a moment. That should have been a Cure 2. That might have given them enough time to set up Regen again. But I'm guessing the healer started like slowing down on the MP spending because they got concerned. However, they used Cure 1 again. So that's problematic. This doesn't surprise me. Bit says, remember Cure 1 doesn't have a 100% proc, so them getting that likely means they were spamming it. Well, I mean, we can see what they're casting. I didn't know what Cure 1 looked like. But this is cure 2. This is cure 2. This is not cure 2. Because it's cure 1. So that's region. There's a cure 1. While free cure is active. And yeah, they probably also were panicking, as Chloe said. Like, the thing is, I'm not like pinning all the blame on the white mage. Something we should also keep in mind is that the white mage is also a sprout. So it's not like we were expecting them to be a hero. They also are in the awkward situation that they used Swiftcast to try and save you earlier, so they had to hardcast Raise, and at least they were trying. They're trying their best, but it's just not enough in this situation, I think. So my suggestions for what you can do differently, Gassel, is my recommendation would be that you should not kitchen sink it. It's a little bit similar to what I was telling Ymir, is that the healer has to react to what you're doing as a tank. So sometimes you just need to like just go, okay, well, I have only readied to use Sentinel for now. So hopefully that'll do. And then just use Sentinel and just close your eyes and hope that you're alive when Sentinel ends, because then you can use Rampart or something. But you have to space them out, because otherwise you're going to be lacking defensive cooldowns. The white mage might have, like, the thing is, now that we know that the white mage started switching to cure 1s when they went low on NP, that you would probably not have survived anyway. But what you could have done better would be to like just trust that your healer knows what they're doing, because in this specific situation you had to do that, and just carefully, cool-headed, use your cooldowns one at a time. You could probably combine Reprisal and Rampart if you feel like you really needed it, but all three was maybe too much. But yeah, it was probably panic on both sides. So obviously, what the healer could have done is they should probably have used Isuna immediately, if they could at least, and then not use Cure 1. I don't know if they had used Lucid Dreaming, and I'm not going to go back and check, but if they hadn't, they could have used Lucid Dreaming when they started having, like, dropping below 8,000, and maybe they would have had the MP to Cure 2 for a little longer. But that's on them. They should have just been spamming Cure 2 as much as they could, but what you could have done differently was space out your defensives a little bit more. And I think that was what most everyone, like both Tristan and Nilix, was suggesting. You also used a potion, so you were trying as much as you could. The reason why a scholar might find that pull really easy compared to a white mage is extremely simple. A white mage at level 45 sees you have a physical vulnerability debuff up. So they have to use Isuna on you, and they need to heal you. What can they heal you with? Only GZDs. And if they fall behind on healing, they will not have time to reapply regen. Scholar, in that encounter, has like a slightly weaker but very permanent regen, just going at it, just passively, so they don't need to worry about reapplying that. They can, when they get ahead on healing, their heals will actually block damage, so they can, you know, intervene damage as it's coming. You can use Whispering Dawn to get an extra regen, and most importantly, when that physical vulnerability debuff comes out, you click Isuna, and in the OGCD window you just throw Lustrate, just problem solved. Like, the reason that a scholar would find this way easier is because in Zemail Darkhold, where you have Art of War, scholar is just completely busted, like insanely overpowered. Sage is also incredibly overpowered, slightly weaker in that particular situation. Because if they had to start casting Diagnosis, they would lose the passive healing from Cardia. But both Scholar and Sage would be in a way better position than a White Mage. Astrologian would also have an easier time dealing with that particular pull because they would have Essential Dignity. The particular weakness White Mage has is the moment that physical vuln comes up, you have to cast Asuna, and White Mage doesn't have anything to heal you while they do that. That's the problem. That doesn't mean you can't do that pull as a White Mage, but it does mean that a White Mage is probably the weakest healer in that pull. So I hope that clears some things up for you, Gassel. Like, it might be that the Scholar was just, like, they had chosen the God healer for that particular dungeon, so they found it very easy. It's also possible that the White Mage wasn't that great. It's also possible that you weren't playing that great. But ultimately, a core thing is that the Scholar was, like, they had a better chance of dealing with it because of their toolkit. But that doesn't mean that, you know, learning defensive cooldown cycling wouldn't be helpful still, like, as we were talking about. That would be what you could have done differently. If you did that in the Scholar poll, like in the Scholar version, you probably also would have done better. You might not have needed it, but you would have done even better in that pull. And here we go again, Mega Pull. Do you wipe again? This is the wiped pull section. Do you wipe again? I hope not. That would be very sad. Well, it looks like you're kinda kitchen sinking it again. Kind of. Not exactly as much, but now you don't have anything for a while again. Part of the problem with kitchen sinking also is, and again, kitchen sinking is using all of your defensive cooldowns, just part of the problem is that if you use every single thing that has like a 2-minute cooldown, for example, then you don't have any of your 2-minute cooldowns or 90-second cooldowns. All of it gone for at least 90 seconds. If you use it like gradually, then they will come back gradually and you can use them again gradually. Like, there's a bunch of things here. But yeah, that is something you just have to get used to, Gassel. It's Paladin is very, very problematic in the low-level range. I've talked about this before when people have asked which tank should I start with. I usually say Paladin or Warrior because they are the simpler tanks. But a core difference between Paladin and Warrior, which is really important to keep in mind, is that Warrior is the one of the two with better defensive cooldowns. And Paladin is the one with the easier rotation for the first many levels. So by playing Paladin, you have to deal with that. And sometimes you might not have what it takes to do the mega giga pull. Like, you might be lacking tools. That's why it is kind of awkward when people like suggest or claim that all tanks are easy mode. They can tank without a healer, because that's not true. Or they say that tanking is easy because it depends on your skill and your job and what level you are. Like, this pull is very big, and something that is worth considering, and this is something that I specifically learned from soloing this dungeon. Most of it, I didn't finish the final boss. This guy, the lizard, has a buff it applies to itself that reflects damage back at you when you attack it, just like the one in Braveflux Longstop. Those guys are mages. Those guys have a tank buster, and they use it like every 3 GCD's length or so. So each of them swing like 2 mobs each, approximately. Just each of them are that strong. Oh, there's 4 of them, by the way. So just double this. Just double this. Just down the line. You just 4 more. That's about the amount of damage they're actually doing. Like, this is similar to if you've ever done the Giga pull right at the start of Snowcloak. I included it in my difficult dungeon pulls video. There's a huge amount of mobs. Most of them die like that. But the reason why that pull is scary is because basically every single mob in the pack has a tank buster. Or like a GCD they can use every few attacks. And some of them do it every attack. So each mob in the pack swings as if they're 2. And the GCD they use deal the same or more damage. So like it bursts the tank harder. Usually this is resolved by the simple fact that the mobs are so squishy in that pull that the tank, if they use an invuln, most of the mobs are dead by the time the invuln ends if your group is decent. Not quite the same experience here. But luckily there was a boss just before this which gave you an opportunity to use your cooldowns again. You got Rampart up, and you had Arm's Length running at the same time, and now you have Arm's Length overlapping with Sentinel. The thing is, this Giga Mega pull, did you get all of the mobs, or are there still the mobs up on the cliff there? Because if they're still here, you're probably fine, because by the time the next, like, big pull comes up, Rampart will be back again. So it was probably fine to go full blast here. But that's like context, right? What's happening. Something interesting about these key things is that it seems like the time they take to finish depends on how many people you put on it. So if you put all 4 people on it, it'll go faster. But even if you put all 4 people on it, it will take just long enough for this crystal to explode. And if everyone steps off, it resets. So someone has to take it. It's quite funny. And there's more lizards with reflect buffs, and more skellies. Those are 6. Essentially 6. Is that the last ones? Also, very smart that you're using the terrain, by the way. I did notice that you did a wall, like a line of sight pull earlier before the second boss. I did notice that. That was very nice. But yeah, the big thing that I think you could benefit from is one thing would be trying to like stay cool and try to not worry too much about how much HP you have and focus more on what you have to do. One way you can do that is by setting a strict plan for which cooldowns you're going to use when, like how I said for Ymir. Shadow Wall, TBN, Oblation, TBN, Rampart, TBN, Oblation, TBN. If you have a strict rule, a strict sequence you're going to use them, and you're not allowed to deviate from that, you're not allowing yourself to deviate from that, then it means that when you see your HP go low, you don't go, oh, I have to use everything. You instead go, well, I don't have anything because according to my schedule, nothing's coming for the next 10 seconds. I used Sentinel and that has to be good enough. Or I die, I guess. And by doing that, you will also discover how powerful just a single cooldown is. Like, we will never know if it would have been fine if you didn't use Rampart in that pull where you wiped. Because you used everything, you just went... So sometimes you just have to, just hope. And that's unfortunately the reality for tanks sometimes. The reason why Warrior is so incredibly overpowered is specifically because they don't have to do that. They can just be their own healer for the most part. But not in this dungeon, of course. Not quite in this dungeon. But, as I said, you can work on your defensive cooldown cycling. In retrospect, if the White Mage had used Cure 2 in that situation, maybe you would have been fine. But it does look like you both are like level appropriate and gear appropriate for the dungeon, which means, as Sharo mentioned on Discord, there's a genuine possibility that you both are severely lacking in accessory stats because of a Realm Reborn being weird. Yeah, Spitz says, your HP bar is mostly the healer's job. That is also part of the reason why, like, that sort of works hand in hand with the way I said the warriors shouldn't sit on their bloodwetting until they're nearly dead. They should just use it. Like, bloodwetting is a mechanic that happens for the healer. Every 25 seconds, your tank becomes impervious to damage and fully heals for 8 seconds. And if the healer can trust that and rely on that, then they can like plan their resources better and do better. And while that particular healer you had might not have played to such an effective level, it like maybe it would have made a difference. Ultimately, the Cure 1 casts probably didn't help either. So I hope that helps, Gassel. But yeah, the big tip, the big takeaway is probably the kitchen sink thing. Right. Just checking, it's been a while. Is Bondi, is Sergeant Blaine still here? Are either of you still here? I think I might be able to cover both. If you are, I just need to know if either one of you are here. And I'll take the one who is here first. Blade! Sergeant Blaine is here. Alright. So, Sergeant Blaine posted a clip from like a year ago of doing Nail Deus Danas 4-man synced with no echo. Oh, you could also be Sergeant Blade, if that works. Yeah, I am interested to see how that works.
Clear run, guys.
So I obviously won't have very much to add here, but it would be interesting. I haven't actually done this fight synced, or for that matter, seen much of it. So I would mostly just be able to see how that goes, right? But it is interesting that you could 4-man it just at all. So I do wonder. I suppose for it to be 4-manable, the DPS check has to be very nice. Like very, very friendly. And there's also something that I'm wondering about in the final phase. How you deal with. There's the Meteors. I don't think I've ever seen the fight this far, because usually by now you have the intermission, all the fight is over. So the thing that I'm most curious about is I'm pretty sure that there is a... I'm pretty sure there's a tank switch mechanic in the final phase. Amokia says, I don't even know where this fight is. This is second Coil of Bahamut turn 4. This one. I don't know, was it Savage? I'm guessing it wasn't, given that the chat window just says Duty Pop, the second Coil of Bahamut turn 4. Not Savage. Okay. I would imagine that it would be too hard. Does the normal version not have an Enrage? Oh, Mandalore, the clip reviews can both be someone asking for advice. It can also be someone who just wants to show something off. In this case, Sergeant Blaine wanted to show us this can be done. So I won't have very much advice to give. I'm more curious to see how they deal with things. I prioritized the clips that were asking for advice. And then we went on to the interesting clips. That is also why I've been saying all this time, if you have a question, you just ask it. Just because I'm in the middle of like looking at a clip doesn't mean you can't ask about something completely unrelated. Like this is all this kind of stream is about, is that we talk about stuff. Bondi says, I'm curious of Ice and Fire. See, that was what I was thinking about as well. Chloe says, apparently its Enrage is 13 minutes. And this clip is 12 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's basically, Mandalore is just some people would like to show some things, and I'll watch. I don't want to watch something without the consent of the person who made it, though. Like that. Oh, limit break for one of them.
No rocks for him.
He's gonna die. Okay, Dolomit's brain is dead.
That is also a very interesting way to deal with it. We had a DP. We have tank, DPS, and healer spreading the mobs. I have a feeling. I'm not 100% sure how they're going to deal with it, and I'm quite curious with the Ice and Fire thing as well. But I do wonder.
Okay, I'll stay on that.
Very much. But very nice. I haven't seen that mechanic done. Because I've only done it unsynced. And you can do it unsynced very easily, of course.
That was a bit,
So I have a question. Did having fewer people lead to some mechanics being unpredictable that would normally be predictable? Or was it mostly that things just didn't have 8 targets? And instead you just had 4?
okay, you managed that too. Brain is dead.
Mm.
Changing orders.
Wait, what? Let me just see. I mean, if you're doing it synced, then you would still have an item level 135, I think, just average. But if you didn't done a minimum item level, you'd lost like 30 item levels, which would be very painful. But I do believe it was no echo.
This one, 2 more meters.
Yeah,
Brain
ready
is
that?
dead.
Those kinds of mechanics where you have to do it twice. It's brutal.
And clean into phase 3.
Or it can be.
Just gotta focus extra on the second
Hey
beat.
Chris, hope you're doing well. And here comes the Mega Flare. I did imagine the second phase would be the most interesting.
Shields for the first time.
I'm not sure when the Ice and Fire thing happens, but that's the one that I'm curious about.
Where's that spawn?
I am the depot.
Okay, second up is all about to hit.
Hey Riku, hope you're doing well. That's awesome, Chris.
Alex. Quickly on full.
I'm not sure on the debuff icons. What is this chain? What do the chain mean?
But now,
If you get too many stacks, you die. Gotta cleanse. If it's purple.
I'm gonna mitigate from the second ad. Watch out, Neil is 4%
Hmm.
away from 48. 3% away.
I edged a
And see, now the tank has a purple chain. A purple chain.
mine, so be careful.
Second ad spawned. Gonna faint.
Dude, that can also be brutal if there's like just a consistent stream of ads just taking the damage you need to deal to the boss. You're getting a lot of stacks, a lot of stacks of those chains.
Careful. Have it full casting.
So how many stacks is too many?
And stop DPS, stop DPS, just run.
Stop DPS, they said.
Nice, perfect. We can take in the D.
To not push him into the next mechanic. Yeah, I imagine something like that.
Okay, join
You'd want it to happen at the right time. That makes sense.
3, yes.
Good.
So now we have ice debuffs,
Move back a little bit.
lightning debuffs, a little bit of fire.
Okay, second fire cannon. Lightning on me again. And then it's gonna hit the third fire cannon. Albus, watch out, yeah? You're gonna have to move.
Move.
See, the thing that I remember is something I'm pretty sure that the boss has like
Boss.
I would have assumed that I was certain that they had like 2 debuffs that if you get one of each you die, but I might have completely misremembered that.
Yeah, move to 3 out.
So that was why I was thinking, how are you going to deal with that with only one tank?
Beacon
Three on me.
it's not really time for me to move during this.
That's fine. Second one is on me.
I think it's probably DPS.
If you get ice twice, you die. Need to cleanse with fire.
Okay,
Ah.
on D.
So every time you get ice, you have to make sure you get hit with fire.
Okay, second Albus.
Oh, and if you have fire, you have to... So does that mean they cancel each other out, so you have nothing? If you get hit with, like... If you have ice and you get hit with fire, you cancel them out?
Pain.
He's gonna summon dragons.
That is interesting.
It's 2, yes.
And very ironic. Could you imagine if the boss just decided to stick to one element? Very silly.
Move back a bit. Lightning on me. Okay,
But yeah, if having only 4 people makes the order a lot more predictable and easier,
Pain on me.
then I could imagine why that would trivialize it.
attack, third fire. Gotta move together there.
So it looks like they throw ice on one person, throw ice on another person, and then they throw an AoE fire on the team, leading to a complete cancellation or something to that effect.
No, it's
That's
2.
what it looks like. But given that you end up with no one dying, it's probably more than that.
Whoever has it.
Exactly, Bits. If the boss just tried playing Ice Mage, they would have won.
The rush to Neil once he lands.
They should have just stuck to one.
Okay, rush to Neil, quickly.
Dynamo.
There's one dragon shooting ice at people and another with fire tether that splashes. Does that mean that the dragon shoots ice once at all the 4 players and then there's a splash fire AoE? Is that what's happening here?
Okay, nice.
Nice.
10%.
That's pretty funny if that's exactly what's happening.
Focus, don't get excited.
Huh. So I guess if you were a full 8, you would have to keep track of who gets the ice, so that you get the like the splash on the correct people.
5%.
First fire.
But that explains why it becomes completely trivial with 4 players. If you're less than 4, then such a mechanic would guaranteed kill someone. Right? Guaranteed kill someone.
Limit break.
Nice.
Well done.
Oh my god.
Very nice.
Oh,
We did
that
it.
was a good run. Oh god. Woof.
Well done.
But that is quite interesting. That is quite interesting. I wonder, like, if you were doing it synced as 8-man, would you then end up skipping a bunch of mechanics? But that was very nice. Very well done. And yeah, exactly, Bits. It's always nice to hear the gamer pop off. Right, so I almost forgot another clip because it was a clip that wasn't on YouTube, but Amokius posted a little funny clip of a floor tank. Someone who became a floor tank, at least. Well, they were born for this life, as you can see. Thank you. That was all. That was it. Let's see it again. When you take the rest and you see this, right? You're this Reaper, and you look at your situation and go, maybe I can use Hell's Egress fast enough to jump for cover. If this man had spammed Hell's Egress as if their life depended on it, I think there would be a minuscule chance that they would have jumped over to where Mokius is and survived. But yeah, no. It just sucks. It's like it's comparable to when you die to getting hit into a wall and a healer limit break comes up. And your character just does the... I'm dead. Because you're still standing in the death zone. Like, that is so sad when that happens. Right, so that does mean that we have one clip left. Let me just do this. Perfect. They call me Sensobar Chaiji. Bondi, do you have an idea of how much of this you had in mind we should see? Also, this is very bright. Let me just...
Just focus.
Yeah.
There you go. Exactly, Bits. Oh, ow! Yay, a rest! Oh, no. Do you have an idea of how much you had in mind that we should see of this, Bondi? You did say that it wasn't particularly exciting, but hey, you still posted it, and you did post it a while ago, and I would like to see it if there's something you would like to show me. Also, just saying, this one's on you. I see mods. I see at least one. There's some kind of interesting summoner optimization that happens, but it's mostly just a mechanic showcase. How long? Like, how do you know like how like the time interval? Because there are 35 minutes left. Of this clip, I mean, or of this VOD, I believe it is. What are you doing here? Look at that Reaper popping off, by the way. Do we get a fun fact? There you go. Now you can mostly not see it. Do we get a fun fact? What would be a fun fact? Especially related to Omega. Fun fact. Did you know that Omega actually originally was a super boss in a previous Final Fantasy game? I think it was the first one, but I'm pretty sure it was in a remake or something to that effect. Fun fact, T3 is a real boss fight. The phase is like 6 minutes. Oh, well, there was a little tech there. Let me just see. So we start with Garuda here. Something that is worth considering is that raid buffs, presumably, are coming up in like, it's a little hard to read, like 15 seconds, I think, by looking at Searing Light. So that, of course, means that that Bondi here has to like kind of meter out and use their actions while still reaching Phoenix in time. So that's why you see Garuda, Slipstream, one right, Titan, and you see right, Mountain Buster, Searing Light is available, right, Mountain Buster, right, Mountain Buster, and Phoenix. So like both Garuda and Titan were stopped early because it's really important that you get use all of your primals to get the most possible damage. And the specific summon itself is the biggest hit. The second biggest, of course, usually being like the rest of the summon. So getting through all that is quite important. Mokius is what's happening to that poor Dark Knight. I think it was a tank buster. I'm guessing. That is an interesting action name. Yeah, that is the reason why this happened this way, is because you want to use all of your summons, you want to use all of your Lego pieces, but you might not care that much about like using them fully. Ah, he cast Fist. This phase is called Run Dynamis. It's Omega learning what Dynamis is. Oh. Well, finally he learned it. And there's Twice Come Ruin. The classic. Oh yeah, I just want to highlight there's nothing to attack. And now there's something to attack. So here we go again. With Searing Light. Yeah, I do agree, Amokis. It is quite insane how much is happening in Ultimate sometimes. I'm guessing that's run Dynamis. This is still run Dynamis because that was what was bleeped out of the mechanic name.
No, sorry, far.
This is of course this is where you know, as you know, the PlayStation icons apparently. Your favorite mechanic of all time. You PlayStation to them. What is it that makes this your favorite mechanic of all time?
Red pretenders.
Waiting.
Waiting, yeah.
It's just crazy and super satisfying to get right. Yeah, I could imagine that. So I think what I think is very fascinating with seeing this, and this is something that I've noticed every time I've seen top footage, I've seen a few, is that viewing the mechanics that are happening, like a thing that Final Fantasy XIV is known for is so-called dance boss fights, which is fights that... The reason why it has this name is because in, for example, World of Warcraft, it's a rare sight. Here, it's like the standard. It's like the gold standard that a boss fight is a dance, where you have to stand exactly here, and then exactly here, and then exactly here. I'll just pause because I did see Bondi added something there. But a dance fight is not common in, like, for example, World of Warcraft, that is more like random in a way sometimes, not always. And some of the most dance-like fights in World of Warcraft are also, by the way, not loved. A good example was Legion's Helya Mythic, which was not very liked, to my knowledge. This is like that. Like, you have to stand exactly here. It's very satisfying to see, but some players might find it very overwhelming. Like, the thing is, Gleaming, people from other games have described specific kinds of boss fights as dances, and then Final Fantasy XIV comes around, and basically all Savage boss fights, slight exaggeration here, right? But most Savage boss fights are exactly that description. Like, they fit perfectly, precisely that description. It's not even like a stretch. Most Savage bosses are dance fights in Final Fantasy XIV, just incidentally, because that's how they're designed. Bondi says, show this next mechanic to someone who doesn't raid and have them explain what's happening. This one coming up? Also, Bondi said, I'm not rushing my primals like I normally would to sync Phoenix with a 2-minute. I don't know what the weird fire icon effect you have does. So that would be difficult already. Everyone's stacking there. Is a shared damage cleave coming up? Or is a stack marker coming up? No, it's just a lot of telegraphed attacks suddenly. And another set. I'm guessing that you can see where those safe spots are beforehand.
Monitors are out. Be on the safe.
Monitors! I remember that from doing O12S. Just act like you're playing and beating top. Oh, alright guys, are you ready? Don't worry about the name being weird.
Side. You are now monitored.
This side will.
The fire debuff we have is something we're balancing through the entire phase. Everyone needs to end the phase with 3. Oh boy. It does look like monitors are different than in O12S. Throw water over your face, seem very sweaty, and stare intensely while we hear button spamming. This bounce I do is what gives it to us. Oh. Oh yeah, I do see. You did get some there. Interesting. And here comes a tank buster that deals a decent amount of damage. And then another one. And there was a tank swap there, I think.
It's gonna be higher than normal, so do not hold back. You're fine there.
We're fine, yeah, we're fine. Just keep hitting him.
Then in the next phase, it's what lets us do the LB3 resets. Ah, so that's where that comes from.
Alright, deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Indeed.
Knows what they're doing.
Any Jesus lore experts in chat?
Was that the part you wanted us to see, Bondi? Pretty much. Well, we have to see Alpha.
If we lose another D6, I might be fucking gone, bro. I'm gonna be gone for like 2 minutes, and then I'm gonna be back and don't get the guys.
Right. That was interesting, and one thing that is absolutely true is that with ultimates, just consider that there's the first team to beat. Let me just close that. The first team to beat this at some point. People had to figure out what all these things do, right? Just consider when you do like a savage boss fight with a guide, or even an ultimate with a guide, that at some point there was a group that just sat there like, what in the world does this mean? Like, I don't know if the 1, 2, 3 thing there, like where you had to get 3 fire stacks, whether the debuff obviously states that you need to do this. But just think about that one thing. That was something that seemed to be happening over the course of those 6 minutes. Like, it was just part of it while everything else was happening. Could you imagine getting to that part and then you didn't have 3 on every one? So you'd lose in the next phase instead. Like, just consider the amount of troubleshooting to figure that out. It's a titanic amount of work, an enormous amount of work to figure out these things. It was figured out manually because a total of 24 stacks go out. Yeah, that does make sense. That of course makes sense. When you reach the point where the last stacks come out, you go, wait, there's 24. But my point is, it's one mechanic in this huge thing, and if you miss it or do it wrong, then something goes wrong in the next phase. If I remember correctly, isn't like not to like sidestep the top thing, but wasn't there something in DSR about there being a mechanic where you can't kill Thordan? Like, you mustn't kill him, otherwise bad things happen or something like that. You also stay at 3 stacks if you receive a stack while at 3. Oh, that would also help you a little bit with figuring out that they have to be spread out evenly. See, Bondi says, World Racers got to that phase on day 3, and it took over 4 more days for anyone to properly do the phase with all 3. Thordan will kneel at the end of a phase, and if you kill him, you don't transition in the final phase. Wait a minute. So does that mean... I can't remember where, like, I don't know which phases there are, but... Does that mean that if you kill Thordan off in, like, an earlier phase, there's another phase, maybe a phase after that, and then the game just goes, oh, but you killed Thordan. So... And then you just lose. Like, does it just continue in this lost state? That would be really, really mean. But also a little funny. It continues in the lost state. How long did it take for people to realize that they had to keep him alive? Instead of Dragon King Thordan, we get Human King Nidhogg. Mandalore says, there was a time when I thought that Claxy Paragons had a lot of mechanics. Oh, you mean from Mr. Pandaria? That was a fun fight. I liked that one. I think my guild, who had like over 200 attempts on Siegecraft or Blackfuse, I believe we got the Claxy down in the second attempt or something on the same night we finally beat Blackfuse. Very fun fight, but apparently really approachable. The people knew almost instantly that they just didn't do it for the sake of practicing the double dragons until they got walled. Ah. A reason I have to not kill Thordan? 0 out of 10. So the thing is, something that is different in World of Warcraft compared to Final Fantasy XIV, and sorry for always bringing up World of Warcraft like that, is that since I think like Cataclysm, you've had this adventure journal that you could just open, like just as easily as I can open this. I could just open a journal and just look up a specific boss from a raid. I don't even have to have completed it. And then I can just read every single thing the boss can do. It doesn't explain when or why it does it for the most part. It might say at X% it does this. Or after X minutes it does that. I think it was like 200 pulls, yeah. And the that means that you could read all of them. But if you have a fight, the Claxy Paragons, notably, was like a fight with 11 mini-bosses. And at any one time, I believe there was 3 down on the field. 2 or 3 down on the field. And then, like, the next one would come down whenever you killed one. And they came down in a certain order. So you wanted to kill them in a certain order so that you didn't have specific mechanics overlapping with each other. But that of course means if every single boss has like 2 or 3 mechanics unique to it, then you would need to read like 35 mechanics or something like that. That's a lot. It sounds like Bot's face from Brute Justice? I suppose so. I actually do have the footage of my raid team back in Mr. Pandaria beating all of these bosses first on our first kill. But maybe that's not something we should explore today. Could be fun, maybe one day. If you want to see some WoW raiding from ancient times, apparently Mr. Pandaria, I'm pretty sure it's over a decade ago. I think. Yeah, 10 years. 10 years since Siege of Orgrimmar. But it is very different. Very, very different. And also a flood of add-ons. Just the other day, I actually read I believe it was a Reddit post, where someone was like, isn't it bad that everyone has to use like boss mods and add-ons to be able to participate in like hardcore, like high-level WoW raiding? And basically everyone said, not really. The developers are designing the boss fights under the assumption that you're using the mods. So, like, that's the alternative. That's the alternative for Final Fantasy XIV. Either the official stance is no mods, and the fights are designed to be beatable without them. Or it is mods allowed, which would mean they would have to assume you're using them, which means they would have to like scale them accordingly. Can you imagine if every AoE we get hit with in WoW gave Vuln stacks? Oh man, them Fury Warriors, am I right? I'm getting rage by standing in the fire. There's a mechanic in the newest final mythic boss that is essentially a juiced version of Chrysalis orbs. It says, off topic, this is a quote from a peer-reviewed journal I'm currently reading for PhD work. People have imaginaries about... Did they mean dreams? Or fantasies? Or imaginations? Welcome back, Emia. Hope you're doing well. A particular problem with Final Fantasy XIV compared to World of Warcraft is that World of Warcraft is PC only, which means that everyone can use mods. Final Fantasy XIV is available on one console and soon to be two, and you can't and will not be able to use mods on them. So if at any point Final Fantasy XIV were to like allow mods, it would basically be equivalent to saying, well, I mean, you can play on a console if you want to have an inferior experience. Yeah, I agree, Gazel. I think it's a very convenient loophole here that there's a good argument for why mods wouldn't be fair to allow because of the console. I think it's a pretty nice way to do it. However, the fact that it is PC only, or isn't PC only and there's consoles, I imagine might be part of Bondi's argument when they said earlier that it would be nice if they added a built-in DPS meter, because then the console players would also have one, right? Tybear says, I wonder if WoW going to Xbox is why they're moving to private auras. Oh yeah, I did read about private auras just the other day. So, if I understood correctly, private auras basically mean that boss fights are starting to have like effects, buffs, debuffs that add-ons cannot read. Like, the effect is just unreadable by an add-on. So it can't just read the battle log or something to see what's happening. It would have to like look at the screen and maybe identify it. But if I remember correctly, they did something like that for a boss. I can't remember how long ago I read about it. And like the days after, people were already working on like overlay mods for World of Warcraft. Like, okay, if you're preventing us from doing it with the built-in add-ons, we'll just make an overlay that can do it. So the attempt to block players from doing it can make things weirdly worse or like just weirdly different. I don't know if it'll be better or worse. I think it's an interesting solution. I wonder how you can play Astrologian on Game Pass. I don't know. But I'm sure there are some hardcore Astrologian console mains. Hairpin says mods cannot be allowed on PC either by Japan law regulations. Oh, well there you go. Ansel says kind of sad that against the rule isn't enough for not using add-ons. We also need PS4 players can't use them, and people are still using mods anyway. Indeed, and I haven't seen it myself. And I have very, very few like spoken accounts on this, but I have heard that there have been individual console players that have specifically been declined from raid teams because they are console players, meaning they wouldn't be able to use mods. Of course, that reason would only be given not in game, if it were even given. Which means I can't, like, given that I don't know the person who said this very well, I can't know if they assume that's the reason they got declined, or if they were told that was the reason. Sergeant Blaine says people will always use plugins so that they can seem like better players when in reality they aren't willing to learn the fights or aren't good enough. It's something like it's often something like pride, or like the pride of being able to beat the thing, and assuming no one sees, you can always just forget to mention you used a mod after the fact, right? So that, it's awkward. It's very awkward in that way that people will do that. That's also partly why I like talk about things like, just because someone has a legend title under their name doesn't mean that they are an incredible player, because you don't know the story behind that title. They could have been the world first clear, but the world first clear might have used mods. They could have bought it. They could have been boosted for free. There are a bunch of possibilities, so the best you can do is simply go, that's a cool title, and then maybe they'll one day tell you the story of how they got that title. But simply because someone is a legend of some kind doesn't mean that they earned it in the hardest way possible. It is very possible that they did something different. I'm not saying that that you have to assume that that's the default. I'm simply saying that you can't assume that every legend title is, 100% legitimate, because there are some out there that are not, unfortunately. On the bright side, that reflects back to the thing with people holding mentor crowns to higher regard than really is necessary, like the video I talked about, where I talked about it in last week, that just because you have a mentor crown doesn't mean that you're meant to be some god gamer or something. Similar to how a legend doesn't mean you have to be a god gamer or something. A legend title, assuming it's legitimate, means you're really good at this particular fight. It might also mean you're extremely good at this particular job that you did it on. But if you did that ultimate as summoner, then that says nothing about your skill as a warrior. And as I've said multiple times before, I had a friend, I haven't spoken to them in a while, that got an ultimate title, or they got a legend title, and then like a while later they watched one of my starter tanking guides at the time and was like, wait, sprint lasts twice as long if you use it before you pull? Huh. And that is of course because to get really good at an ultimate, you need this much skill at pulling a wall-to-wall pull in a dungeon. This much. 0. It doesn't help you with an ultimate, obviously. And Z-Type says, let's be real, most boss mod add-ons for WoW are just bare bones versions of the very pretty and very consistent telegraph system that 14 spoils us with. I mean, so yesterday I saw this short by Just Drive Ace, where he like, it's like 2 NPCs going, you know how we put down this like red field to indicate where we're using the big attack before we do it? Yeah. What if we didn't put down the red stuff and just did the big attack without saying anything? We could do that. And the top comment was normal versus savage rating. And I was like thinking the exact same thing. So many like savage and ultimate bosses are like, you'll figure it out. Maybe they'll show you like a few frames of the telegraph just as it lands, where it's too late anyway. Yeah, the second boss of Aurum Vale got the opposite memo. They got like a complaint letter saying please add telegraphs. Gansel says, imagine if you were required to use mods to play the game. How hard would it be to get new players? Very hard. But it depends on how hard it is to get mods. In Final Fantasy XIV, it isn't like simple to get mods to work, to my knowledge. Like, that DPS meter requires some settings and stuff. It has gotten easier, let me tell you that. But that would be a massive deal breaker for a lot of players if they had to get that. In World of Warcraft, you can just like download a tool that'll install it for you. You just choose what you want. Done. And if you don't want to download that, you can just download the file and just drag and drop it into the correct folder. It's very, very easy. So it wouldn't be that bad. It would probably be a deal breaker for some people, but it's a lot easier than in Final Fantasy XIV. And also, and Sergeant Blaine says, whenever I hear someone say ultimates are super easy, I assume they used add-ons. This is actually something that I've talked about before, in regards to like self-esteem in this case. If you get extremely good at Final Fantasy XIV, so good in fact, that you honest to God, honest to your heart, believe that ultimates are easy. Actually, if you say that, then you are suggesting that everyone else are bad and you're just normal. If you instead say, I'm extremely good at ultimates, then you avoid calling everyone else bad and manage to praise yourself because you're extremely good at ultimates, which are hard, right? But some people forget that. Like, they actually care more about sounding cool for feeling that ultimates are easy to them than the implication that if ultimates are easy, then it means that it isn't particularly impressive that you're good at them. Bondi says, I don't really care if someone cheated or bought anything. All it means is they cheated themselves out of the best PvE content in the genre, and that is a very healthy perspective. Just because I have the meat shield title doesn't mean I enjoy tanking. Mandalorian says, it feels scarier to reprog a boss on another role than learn a fight from zero. I imagine the reason why it feels scarier is because as you already know the fight, you feel like you're supposed to be better. Something like that, right? So that's why it might feel scarier. Bit says, the way I think of the telegraphs is that it's an instinct that the best adventurers have. Something is going to happen kind of like this. I just feel it. The way that I'm pretty sure that there is like there is an implied explanation for what the telegraphs are. In the Stormblood story, I'm going to keep it a little vague to the best of my ability to not spoil anyone, but you see someone who basically has the echo fight a fight as if they have like the Sharingan from Naruto, you know, where they can just they can like tell what's going to happen like a moment before it does, so they can like perfectly dodge each attack, like just barely, because they can see it coming and they have the echo. I'm pretty sure that's what's telling us the telegraphs. Like, we just know what's going to happen from the echo. And that's also true the Stone Vigil hard fight where there's no telegraphs. That one is really funny because as they don't do anything targeted, it means that you can solo it very easily if your party dies. Hi Shiro, hope you're doing well. And yeah, exactly. A lot of people do the thing where they say something is easy just because it's second nature to them. That's also part of the reason why I go through this motion of explaining here. Now, like, I have you guys and girls, depending. Maybe you identify as neither. That's okay too. I have you people listening, and I tell you not to think like that. Just because it's second nature to you doesn't mean that it's easy. So if you say it's easy for me, then that's a different story. But if you say it's easy, it's the same as how I say, remember to say in your opinion, if you're saying something that is your opinion, because it's not implied that it is your opinion just because it should be obvious. It isn't. It's never obvious. If you say something and you say it without saying in my opinion, you're basically saying that it's a fact. So if you're saying ultimates are easy, period, then you're claiming it as if it's a fact. If you say in my opinion, or then it means that it's just something you observe, and then I think a lot of people will say you're probably wrong about that. If you say ultimates are easy to me, then you're specifying that it has something to do with your skill level. Exactly, Emir. Gunbreaker's the easiest job in the game to me. Perfect. And it's specifically the qualifier that you add that it is something that is relevant to you, like specifically you find it easy. It's not like a general fact. And that matters a lot, because then you're not like dunking on anyone else by saying that. Subjectivity is implied. It should be, but welcome to the internet. You can't trust that. If you say something as if it is a fact, then someone is going to assume that you meant it as a fact. I'm going to assume it's just not the echo, just because I like think of the other player characters as being just as cool. Well, the thing is, Bits, that wait, how far in the MSQ are you, Bits? How far are you in the MSQ? Just double checking to be sure. You are in Stormblood. Okay. The other player characters are not well explained in Stormblood. Or Heavensward, or A Realm Reborn. But there is a point where they are explained, and I will not try to specify how, because that might be a big spoiler for you. But the best I can say is that they are exactly as cool as your character. Exactly as cool as your character. Although they might be showing up in Speedos. Gleaming says, early on they're just like adventurer friends you brought along. Yeah, weirdly, somehow you can do that when you need it. You specifically need it to have the echo to engage Ifrit safely, right? So they're not just adventurer friends you brought along. It happens to be adventurer friends that just so happen to have the echo. Just so happens. Very interesting. And also true, there are multiple scions that have, like, there are scions with the echo, and this and that. And good night, gets an echo. Hope you got a lot of ore. But yeah, it's complicated, but it is explained eventually. Mokia says, ask 1,000 Gunbreaker mains if Gunbreaker's easy and they'll all say yes. No. I can almost guarantee you that's not true. Oh man, so a while back I put out a video where I listed the 5 hardest jobs in my opinion. So I listed one from each role, meaning the roles being these 5 roles, right? And I said, in my opinion, Dark Knight is the hardest tank to play optimally. Like perfectly. That means things like, oh, 2-minute burst is coming up. I sure hope you made sure to collect a Dark Arts buff so that you have that extra edge of shadow. I sure hope you have a full MP bar and a full blood gauge, but don't overcap it, and all that stuff. And while Gunbreaker is sometimes harder in its own way, I just felt personally that Dark Knight had slightly higher of a skill ceiling in that particular aspect. And there's a lot of people that were very cross that Gunbreaker wasn't listed as the hardest tank. A lot of people, and they included mains. So, the thing is with that, Amokius, is that some people will main a job because it is the best at something. Some people will main a job because it's hard. Like, some people will choose the hardest job and main it because it gives them the opportunity to show their skill by being good at the hard job. And there are Gunbreaker mains. Almost, I can basically guarantee you that there are Gunbreaker mains that chose it either because it was the strongest at the time where they were choosing their main, or 2, because it was considered the hardest. So if some random guy with a pink small dragon main character comes along and doesn't say that Gunbreaker is the hardest, that doesn't mesh well with how they understand the game, right? They chose Gunbreaker for a reason. And they're not going to say Gunbreaker's easy. They're going to say that they are good at Gunbreaker. Because the whole point was that Gunbreaker is hard. Gunbreaker's easy, just do the open and then press everything on cooldown. just do, and then draw the rest of the owl, am I right? Yeah, that's a good one, Gleaming. My job is the hardest, except when people complain about it being too hard, then it's the easiest. It's pretty good. And yeah, exactly, Bits. That is like the exact opposition to what I said before with, you know, people saying X is easy. If you have a vested interest in something being hard because that makes you good, then you're like that of course flips that whole thing on its head in a way. Lane says, I think my job is easy and I'm bad at the game, and if I'm better than you, you must be really bad. I suppose that is also a perspective. I know someone who thinks like that. In real life. If I can do it, then it's easy, and if I can't do it, then it's dumb. But yeah, the thing is, what you find difficult can also vary, like depending on what you're doing. Lane says, people tell me Ninja is so hard, but it's just like pressing buttons fast and not claiming the burst. See, the thing is, and this is actually a really good example of how different kinds of difficulty exists. That's also why I made a video where I talked about what could make a job difficult. I give examples of what kind of things makes the game difficult, right? Ninja is like a tough test in being able to like weave correctly, and it is quite button press intensive when it's bursting. But if you understand how to weave together a burst window, if you already get that, if you're already that far in your basic understanding, then Ninja becomes much easier, because Ninja is almost entirely about the burst. So if you find bursting easy, then Ninja is probably not too hard. Just as a random example, right? Random question, but do you think someone named is a bot? Probably. Probably. And also that one, Blaine. Someone is better than me. They're cheating. Someone worse than me. They clearly suck. It's the opposite of everyone worse than me might as well quit the game because they're so bad. Everyone better than me should touch grass. Equally ridiculous. Oh yeah, they could be a Rigadon, Blaine. They might be a Rigadon. But yeah, that is also a very good example of why it can be hard to claim something is just de facto difficult. That's also why when I made my video on which jobs I find the hardest and which jobs I find the easiest, that I hope, can't remember, but I'm pretty sure I said in my opinion when I made the videos. Because the thing is, what makes a job difficult depends on the person. Something that I do find interesting is if you see someone say that Dark Knight is Lamau easy mode, you just press all cooldowns on cooldown. If they don't specify, I typically assume that what they mean is that they don't understand what a 2-minute burst is, because Dark Knight has no mercy. It's just named Change Stratagem, Divination, maybe an Emboldened, Searing Light, Battle Voice, Technical Finish, Arcane Circle. Like it just has a lot more buffs associated with it, and Dark Knight wants to put everything in that. And because it doesn't have a box to put it in naturally, you have to invent one. Meanwhile, Gunbreaker comes out the box with one. And to me, that makes Dark Knight harder, but that's because I find the structure of Gunbreaker and Paladin slightly easier. Lane says, how many jobs still have 90-second damage abilities? Anyone know? No one wait. Damage cooldowns. Ninja has Bunshin. Monk has Riddle of Wind. Isn't that it? I think those are both all of them, right? I'm pretty sure it's Bunshin and Riddle of Wind. That's it. Oh yeah, Salted Earth. That's true. Salted Earth. So we have 3. Shohei says, is a machinist hard? Casually? No. It might have a lot of buttons to press, but if you want to like play machinist, it's not too bad. It can be very difficult to perfect it though, because it has a lot like of optimization, and its optimal rotation might not be too intuitive, because it involves not using your best attacks immediately, which is very backwards for a lot of, like, compared to a lot of other jobs. Can I say Blue Mage here? Oh yeah, true. They do have 90-second primal spells. I mean, Blue Mages are really strange, since they can choose when they have a burst. They can just use Moonflute whenever they like, if they want to. And there is a very big difference, but like, so there's a difference there's a huge difference to keep. There's both the hyper casual level of optimization. That's basically, I mean, you're using your cooldowns, right? Then there's like the level above that, where you're trying to do an opener, you're trying to do a burst, you're using your cooldowns kinda well, and then you start to get to like the optimization, where like, for example, like you're trying to like make sure you like with a black mage you're optimizing your rotation to the point that you don't like waste anything. But the end pass is like that guy that makes no mistakes optimally. And the reason why I say machinist optimized is really hard is actually because the difference between perfect and almost perfect is basically non-existent, because because of the strictness of the optimal machinist rotation, you can't do it almost perfectly. It's either perfect or not perfect at all, if we're going to exaggerate a little bit. Other jobs have more wiggle room with what they decide to do, which means that what exactly is perfect is a lot more vague, but that also means that there's a much greater part of the like upper skill level that is like really good but not perfect. Eureka says, same for warrior. Top warrior logs are basically identical down to the GCD, and it's all about how many of your non-inner release GCDs crit. You can tell a lot about a machinist player by asking them when skyhook should be used. You mean air anchor? And yeah, there's two common openers for, well, common openers. There are two openers that are known for machinist, and one of them is slightly preferred when you have good rate buffs. The other one is preferred otherwise, but the power difference is so small that people have just kind of leaned towards doing the slightly like the optimize for rate buffs. Why? Because the people that care about optimizing for rate buffs are probably also the only people that would be like, well, in this group I should use this one, and in this group I should use this one. So, like, it's just fine to just learn the one opener pretty much. You use air anchor first, right? I don't like, I would have to check my notes to play machinist properly, but if I were to go into a dungeon right now, I would probably use air anchor in the time frame where we're still rounding up mobs and pulling, because it is a single target attack. I might not use drill because I want bioblaster out early. But yeah, you can, like, one example is air anchor drill 1, 2, 3. I think it's 1, 2, 3 chainsaw. Yeah, exactly. Like, that is one. I can't remember if the other one is specifically, I believe the other one delays air anchor. It says, Summoner's Searing Light I love as a box. On top of being that inbuilt reminder, this is when 2 minutes is coming. I just really like it when DPS jobs are not only me make big number. I get that. It's in the guide. Well, that is exactly like that. The opener that I have demonstrated in my machinist guides, I actually demonstrated before the opener that people recommend on the balance now came to power. When I made my guides, the opener that people commonly use now was called delayed tools, and the one that I demonstrated was the standard. Then later, they flipped them. So now, I believe it's called standard, and then the one that I show in my guide is early air anchor or something like that. The thing is, the one that I demonstrate is the one that is like a smidgen better if you're not in a coordinated group. So, you know, it's probably better if you're like new to the job or just slightly experienced, like unless you're like super mega hardcore master machinist, it's probably perfect for you. Ishiro says like how Monk can do Lunar Solar to open, but technically Solar is better, but only if it pushes Phantom Rush into raid buffs. It's really weird. It's also because it actually relies on when the boss dies. It actually is, if I recall correctly, it's more about when the boss dies. It's really weird. The hardest jobs for most people are the ones that require precise pre-pull setup. That also makes sense, and most people would be like a majority of the more casual players. And if they're trying to play a job perfectly or really well, then it's almost impossible for them to be allowed to do the pre-pull right, because no one's going to do a pull timer in casual content. Does anyone remember pre-pull Doton? I bring it up somewhat regularly because it's part of the problem that I believe is why we still see single target Doton now. Never let people know about having to wait a full minute for ether flow every minute. I still think it's even funnier that that warriors a long time ago had a 45-second opener. And the reason why they don't is because Infuriate can only be used in combat. If Infuriate could be used while not in combat, then warriors would have a 2-minute opener. A 2-minute pre-pull opener. Because you would have, like, if you could use this before combat started, you would always start the battle with a full beast gauge. Obviously you would. Yeah, the best I can suggest for your bits is if it's casual content, then don't worry too much about pull timers. Don't worry too much about it. You can try, but there's almost always one guy who pulls. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. That's the way it is. I mean, if you're waiting for someone in cutscene in a dungeon, then it's kind of understandable to do that, Blaine. In a trial or a raid, fortunately, the cutscenes are forced. You can't even pull before the cutscenes are over. Very nice. Right then, we actually got down through we got through the entire list of clips that had been posted before this stream. And we got to talk a lot about a lot of things. If you enjoyed the company of the wonderful people, most of the wonderful people that you see in the chat, remember that there's a Discord community server that you can join where you can find most of these wonderful people and me. You'll also find the weekly schedule where I post around Sunday or Monday what's coming up in the following week, including streams, videos, whatever it is. You will also find the announcement room where I usually post first. If there is, like, when I post a new video, plan a new stream, it usually appears there first. You can also go into the role assignments room and grab the reminder role if you would like a notification when I post these things. It also comes with a little extra notification around 15 minutes before something that is time sensitive comes up, like a stream. So do consider that. And if you did enjoy the stream and found it very entertaining, it would help me a lot if you leave a like on the stream itself, in the YouTube system, the thumbs up that tells YouTube that this was a very enjoyable stream and you would like other people to enjoy it as well. And that helps me a lot. So thank you so much in advance. Which is more fun, Ninja or Samurai? That depends on the person. Personally, I prefer Samurai, but both are fun in the right context. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching and hanging out, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Tomorrow I'm releasing a video about the pronunciation of actions, which both includes a lot of foreign language, especially Sage, and Samurai and Ninja, and my trying my best, and also includes some words that people just often don't know what mean. Right, so good night, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And I hope to see you all very soon. Bye bye. The video just says Enochian 8 times. Bye bye.